Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Eric Sanders had been a park ranger for exactly 4 months and 13 days when he discovered the pattern. And in that moment of discovery, staring at the incident report spread across his desk, dates highlighted in yellow, names circled in red, he understood that his training at the National Park Service Academy had prepared him for wildlife encounters, medical emergencies, search and rescue protocols, but absolutely nothing for the truth written in these files. 7 people had vanished from Sequoia National Park's giant forest since 1942. All women of Asian descent. All disappeared on December 7th. All last seen near the General Sherman tree. And today was December 6, 2018. And Luna Griffin, a Japanese-American photographer from San Francisco who'd checked in yesterday for a 3-day solo camping trip, was somewhere in the giant forest right now. Her permit showing she planned to photograph the General Sherman at sunrise tomorrow. December 7th, 76 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, after the internments began, after everything went wrong. Sanders pushed his chair back from the desk, hands shaking slightly as he pulled out his phone and opened the park database. He'd found the pattern by accident, filing paperwork for a routine lost hiker case when he'd noticed an old file from December 2011 marked "Cold Case Presumed Dead." Catherine Tanaka, age 32, amateur botanist, vanished December 7th near General Sherman. The file had been sparse. Last seen at 5:47 a.m. by another camper who'd been photographing sunrise at the massive tree. Tanaka had been setting up her equipment to collect samples from the forest floor. When the photographer returned 40 minutes later, Tanaka's gear was still there. Sample bags, field notebook, backpack. But Tanaka herself had vanished. Search teams had combed the area for 3 weeks. K9 units, helicopters, even thermal imaging. Nothing. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist. Sanders had been curious about the December 7th date, Pearl Harbor Day, a date that resonated in American history. He'd searched the database for other incidents on that date, expecting to find nothing, perhaps one coincidence. Instead, he'd found 6 more cases, each more disturbing than the last, stretching back 76 years like tombstones in a graveyard. He'd spent 4 hours pulling files, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline that made his skin crawl with each new connection. All the victims had been women of Asian descent, Japanese, Chinese, Korean. All had disappeared from within a 1-mile radius of the General Sherman tree. All vanished on December 7th. And all the searches had ended the same way. No body recovered. No resolution. Cases eventually filed as presumed dead. 1942, Keiko Yamamoto, Park Service employee, age 24, 1957. Mary Yoshida, tourist, age 41, 1973. Susan Nakamura, researcher, age 29, 1988. Jennifer Kim, hiker, age 36, 1996. Patricia Wong, photographer, age 27, 2003. Lisa Chen, college student, age 22, 2011. Catherine Tanaka, botanist, age 32. All Japanese, Chinese, or Korean descent. All disappeared without trace on December 7th, all near the same location. The General Sherman tree, the largest tree on Earth, a giant sequoia standing 275 feet tall, over 36 feet in diameter at the base, estimated to be 2,300 years old. And now Luna Griffin was scheduled to be there at sunrise tomorrow. December 7th, 2018. Sanders grabbed his Garmin InReach Explorer Plus, his Motorola radio, and his jacket. He'd only been a ranger since August, fresh out of the academy, eager to prove himself. Assigned to Sequoia because he'd scored high on the ecology exam and mentioned California as his preferred placement. His supervisor, District Ranger Patricia Morse, had been skeptical of his youth, his inexperience, his enthusiasm. "Book learning doesn't prepare you for real situations," she'd said during his first week. "Experience does, and you don't have any." She was right. But he had this pattern, these files, and less than 12 hours to find Luna Griffin, before she became the 8th name on the list. He tried calling Morse's cell phone. Voicemail. Left a message. "Chief, this is Sanders. I found something in the archives. Pattern of disappearances, all December 7th, all near General Sherman. We have a camper out there right now, Luna Griffin, scheduled to be at that exact location tomorrow morning. I'm heading out to find her, bring her in for safety. Call me back." Sanders checked his equipment. GPS with full battery, satellite communicator, first aid kit, bear spray, headlamp, emergency beacon. His phone showed Luna Griffin's Instagram account. Her last post from 6 hours ago showed the giant forest at sunset. Caption reading, "Camping under giants tonight, tomorrow morning. General Sherman sunrise shoot. Can't wait." The post had been geotagged. Sanders pulled up the coordinates on his GPS, 36.5819 degree N, 118.75, 16 degree ons W. About 3 miles into the giant forest, near Crescent Meadow. If he left now, he could reach her camp by 8 p.m., convince her to evacuate, prevent whatever happened on December 7th from happening again. He started his truck and headed toward the giant forest trailhead as winter darkness fell over Sequoia National Park. The elevation here was 6,400 feet, December temperatures dropping into the 20s after sunset. Snow dusted the ground between massive sequoia trunks, each tree a living cathedral, some of them standing since before the Roman Empire. Sanders had loved the sequoias since his first visit as a child. The sheer scale of them, the age, the sense that these trees had witnessed all of human history and would witness centuries more. Now, driving past them in darkness, they felt different. Not protective, but watchful. Not ancient, but patient. Waiting for something. He parked at the trailhead at 7:47 p.m. and started hiking, his headlamp cutting a narrow beam through darkness so complete it felt solid. The trail to Crescent Meadow was well maintained, wide and clear, but 3 miles in mountain darkness felt longer. His GPS showed him moving steadily toward Griffin's coordinates, elevation gradually increasing. At 8:23 p.m., he saw light ahead. A camping lantern, warm and electric, hanging from a tree branch. Luna Griffin's tent was a quality 3-season model, properly staked, rainfly secured. Her camp was neat, organized, professional. A woman who knew what she was doing in backcountry. "Ms. Griffin?" Sanders called out, not wanting to startle her. "Park Service, I need to speak with you." Movement inside the tent, then the zipper opened and a woman emerged. Mid-30s, Japanese-American, athletic build, wearing a down jacket and wool hat. She looked confused but not alarmed. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "My permit's valid through the 9th. "Nothing's wrong with your permit," Sanders said. "But I need you to pack up and come back to the ranger station tonight. There's a situation." "What kind of situation? Bear activity? Weather warning?" How did he explain this? How did he tell her that 7 women who looked like her had vanished from this area on December 7th across 76 years? That he'd found a pattern no one else had noticed? That she was scheduled to photograph the General Sherman at sunrise tomorrow, which was December 7th? That something was very wrong here? "There's been a pattern of incidents at General Sherman on December 7th, he said carefully. "I think it would be safer if you came back tonight, rescheduled your sunrise photography for another day." Griffin frowned. "Incidents? What kind of incidents?" "Disappearances. 7 people since 1942, all on December 7th, all women of Asian descent, all near the General Sherman tree." Her expression shifted from confusion to concern to something harder, anger, maybe, or frustration. "Are you seriously telling me to leave because of some statistical coincidence about Asian women? Do you know how that sounds?" Sanders felt heat rise in his face. She was right. It sounded exactly like racial profiling, like paranoid pattern seeking. "I understand how it sounds, but I have the files. 7 cases, identical circumstances. December 7th is tomorrow. You're planning to be at General Sherman at sunrise tomorrow. I'm asking you, as a park ranger concerned for your safety, to please postpone." "No," Griffin said flatly. "I drove 5 hours, hiked 3 miles, I have permits, and I'm shooting that tree at sunrise. If there's a legitimate safety concern, active bear, unstable weather, trail damage, then tell me. But 7 women disappeared across 76 years isn't a legitimate safety concern. That's superstition. Miss Griffin, am I breaking any park regulations? No, but then with respect, Ranger, I'm staying. You can file whatever report you need to file. But I'm not leaving because of some pattern you think you found in old paperwork. Sanders stood there, feeling his inexperience like a weight. A veteran ranger would know how to handle this, would have authority, gravitas, the ability to convince someone that danger was real even when it sounded impossible. But he was 24 years old, 4 months on the job, and Griffin was looking at him with the patient exasperation of someone dealing with an overzealous rookie. At least let me camp nearby, he said. If something does happen, you'll have immediate help. Griffin considered this. You want to stay up all night babysitting me because of a statistical anomaly? I want to make sure you're safe. That's my job. She sighed. Fine. Set up wherever, but I'm hiking to General Sherman at 5:30 a.m., and I'm shooting that sunrise with or without your blessing. Sanders set up his emergency bivvy 50 yards from Griffin's tent, close enough to respond quickly but far enough to give her privacy. He radioed into the station, got night dispatcher Rodriguez, who sounded bored and skeptical when Sanders explained the situation. So you're camping in the giant forest because of a pattern you found in 70-year-old files? Sanders, did Chief Morse approve this? I left her a message. Uh-huh. Well, your GPS tracker shows you're at Crescent Meadow. Stay safe, stay warm, and try not to let your imagination run wild out there. The radio went silent. Sanders sat in his bivvy, watching Griffin's camp through the trees, feeling foolish and young and certain he was missing something. The pattern was real. 7 disappearances, all December 7th, all the same location. That wasn't coincidence, that was design. Purpose. Pattern. But what kind of threat operated on an annual schedule? What took women specifically of Asian descent, specifically from this location, specifically on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor? Sanders pulled out his phone, barely any signal, but enough to load Wikipedia. He searched December 7th, 1941 Sequoia National Park and found general information about how the park had operated during WO2. Reduced staff, some areas closed, resources diverted to war effort. Nothing unusual. He tried Japanese-American Sequoia National Park 1942 and found something more interesting. A brief mention in a National Park Service historical archive that several Japanese-American employees had been removed from their positions in early 1942 following Executive Order 9066, which had authorized the internment of Japanese Americans. They'd been sent to camps, most to Manzanar, about 60 miles east of Sequoia. Sanders felt his stomach tighten. The first disappearance had been in December 1942. Keiko Yamamoto, Park Service employee. What if she hadn't disappeared? What if she'd been sent to an internment camp and the record had been filed incorrectly? He searched for Keiko Yamamoto Manzanar and found nothing. Tried Keiko Yamamoto internment and got a single result. A scanned document from the National Archives, a death certificate. Keiko Yamamoto, age 24, died December 7, 1942 at Manzanar War Relocation Center. Cause of death: exposure. Exposure. In an internment camp, on the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Sanders searched deeper, his phone battery draining as he pulled up article after article about Manzanar. The camp had held over 10,000 Japanese Americans at its peak, families ripped from their homes and businesses, forced to live in tar paper barracks in the Owens Valley desert. Conditions had been harsh: extreme heat in summer, bitter cold in winter, inadequate food and medical care. And on December 7, 1942, the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor, there had been riots. Guards had fired into crowds. Several internees had died, including Keiko Yamamoto, a former Sequoia Park employee who'd frozen to death after fleeing into the December night to escape violence. Sanders set down his phone, hands trembling. Keiko Yamamoto hadn't disappeared from Sequoia. She'd been taken from Sequoia, sent to Manzanar, and died there. But the pattern started with her. The first disappearance in the files was December 7, 1942, the same day Keiko died 60 miles away. What if the others weren't random? What if they were connected to her somehow? He pulled up the list again, searching for each name with Manzanar or internment. Found nothing conclusive, but found something else. A photograph from 1941, a Sequoia National Park employee group photo. And there, second from left in the back row, was a young Japanese woman with kind eyes and a ranger uniform. The caption identified her as Keiko Yamamoto, seasonal naturalist. Sanders zoomed in on her face. She looked happy in the photo, proud. A year before Executive Order 9066, a year before her world ended. A sound cut through his thoughts, a scream, high and sharp from the direction of Luna Griffin's tent. Sanders burst out of his bivvy, headlamp swinging wildly, and ran toward her camp. "Griffin, Luna, are you okay?" Her tent was zipped shut, lantern still burning inside, casting shadows on the nylon. Sanders could see movement, thrashing, violent. "Griffin!" He reached for the zipper, yanked it open. The tent was empty. No sleeping bag, no gear, no Luna Griffin. Just the lantern hanging from the ceiling loop, swaying slightly. But Sanders had just heard her scream, had seen the shadows moving, had watched someone thrashing inside. His radio crackled with static, then a voice, Luna Griffin's voice. "Help me, please, it's so cold. I can't feel my hands. Please, someone help me." Sanders grabbed his radio. "Griffin, this is Sanders. What's your location?" "I don't know," her voice said, layered with static and something else. Wind, maybe, or crying. "I was in my tent, and then I wasn't. I'm somewhere else, somewhere cold. There are buildings, but they're wrong, they're old, and there's a woman, oh God. There's a woman standing in front of me, and she's..." The transmission cut off. Sanders spun in a circle, headlamp beam cutting through giant sequoias, seeing nothing but trees and snow and darkness. Where was she? Her voice had sounded close, intimate, like she was using a handheld radio, but her tent was empty. Her gear was gone. Her footprints in the snow led away from camp, but only for 10 feet before they simply stopped, as if she'd been lifted into the air. His GPS showed 11:47 p.m., still December 6th. The disappearances happened on December 7th. He still had time. "Griffin," he shouted into the forest. "Luna Griffin, respond." No answer except wind through the sequoia canopy, a sound like breathing. Sanders tried his radio again, cycling through all frequencies. Nothing but static. He tried his satellite communicator. No signal, which shouldn't be possible with clear sky overhead. He tried his cell phone. No service. He was alone in the giant forest with a missing camper and no communication. Training said, establish a search perimeter, mark last known position, call for backup, follow protocol. But protocol didn't account for footprints that ended in midair. Protocol didn't explain voices on radios from people who'd vanished. Protocol was for normal emergencies, and this was not normal. Sanders forced himself to think. Luna Griffin had screamed. Her tent had shown movement. Then she'd disappeared, and her voice had come through his radio saying she was somewhere cold, somewhere with old buildings, somewhere with a woman. Cold. Old buildings. A woman. Manzanar. The internment camp. Keiko Yamamoto. But that was impossible. Manzanar was 60 miles away and had been abandoned since 1945. Luna Griffin couldn't be there. This was shock, confusion, his mind making connections that weren't real. His headlamp flickered. Went out. Came back on, but dimmer now, the beam yellowed and weak. Sanders smacked it with his palm, a gesture that accomplished nothing but made him feel less helpless. When the light stabilized, he saw her, a woman standing 30 feet away, visible in the headlamp beam. Asian features, mid-20s, wearing a 1940s-era park ranger uniform that hung on her too thin frame. Her face was pale, almost luminescent. Her hair was long and black, hanging forward to partially obscure her features. and she was staring directly at Sanders with eyes that reflected his headlamp beam like an animal's eyes, but wrong. The reflection was white, not the yellow-green of eyeshine. "Keiko Yamamoto?" Sanders whispered. The woman tilted her head, movement too smooth, too fluid. When she spoke, her voice was Luna Griffin's. "Help me. Please, it's so cold." Then she turned and walked into the forest, moving between sequoia trunks, her gait stilted like someone relearning how to walk after injury. Every survival instinct Sanders possessed screamed at him not to follow. But Luna Griffin was out there somewhere, and this thing, whatever it was, had her voice, which meant it was connected to her disappearance. He followed. The woman moved steadily through the giant forest, her pale form visible ahead even when Sanders's headlamp flickered. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge him, just walked with that strange gait toward some destination only she knew. Sanders tried to mark his path, breaking branches, dropping small items from his pack. But when he looked back, the markers were gone, or the path had changed, or he was somehow walking in a direction that didn't match his GPS. The device showed him moving east, but the terrain suggested south, and his compass spun uselessly. Reality felt thin here, negotiable. The giant sequoias looked the same but subtly wrong. Bark patterns he didn't recognize, branch configurations that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The snow on the ground appeared fresh, but his boots left no prints. Time felt elastic. His watch showed 11:52 p.m., then 11:49 p.m., then midnight, numbers jumping randomly. The woman in the ranger uniform stopped ahead, standing at the edge of a clearing Sanders didn't remember from the trail maps. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that absolutely should not exist. A wooden building, single-story tar paper roof, the architectural style of 1940s military construction. It looked exactly like photographs Sanders had seen of Manzanar Barracks. But this was Sequoia National Park, not Owens Valley. This was 3 miles from Crescent Meadow, not 60 miles east at an abandoned internment camp. The woman gestured toward the building, her movement jerky like a film skipping frames. Then she opened her mouth and a sound emerged that made Sanders' teeth ache. A scream that contained multiple voices, decades of voices, all screaming in unison. The sound peaked, held for an impossible duration without breath, then stopped. In the silence that followed, Sanders heard crying from inside the building. He approached slowly, every nerve firing warnings, his hand on the bear spray canister, even though he knew it would be useless against whatever this was. The building's door hung open, interior dark except for a faint light source Sanders couldn't identify. Inside he found Luna Griffin. She sat on the floor of what appeared to be a barracks room. Bare wooden walls, a small potbelly stove in the corner, cots arranged in rows. She was shivering violently, her lips blue, frost forming on her jacket, despite the stove glowing with heat that Sanders couldn't feel. "Griffin," he said, rushing to her. "Luna, can you hear me? We need to get you out of here." She looked at him with eyes that didn't quite focus. "I can't leave. She won't let me. She says I have to understand first. Have to feel what she felt. December 7th. Every year she comes back and she takes someone who looks like her and makes them feel it. The cold, the fear, the betrayal. She was American, you know, born in Sacramento, worked for the Park Service, loved these trees. Then they came for her, took her to Manzanar, and on the first anniversary of Pearl Harbor when the riot started, she ran into the desert, died of exposure, froze to death alone while guards shot at shadows." Sanders pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around Griffin. She was hypothermic, dangerously so despite the ambient temperature being above freezing outside. "We're leaving. Now. Can you walk?" "She's here," Griffin whispered. "She's always here. This is where she died. Not Manzanar. Here." She came back, walked all the way back from the camp 60 miles through December cold, walked until she reached her trees and died here. Under the General Sherman. They never found her body. She's still here, still frozen, still angry. Movement in Sanders' peripheral vision. The woman in the ranger uniform stood in the doorway, blocking their exit. Up close, Sanders could see details he'd missed. Her skin wasn't pale, it was frost. Ice crystals covering her like a shell. Her eyes weren't reflecting light, they were producing it. A cold white glow. And her hair wasn't just long, it was growing, extending down her back and across the floor like black vines, spreading toward Luna Griffin. "You understand nothing," the thing said, and its voice was cold incarnate winter-given speech. "You see patterns in files, but you don't see pain. 7 decades I have walked these trees, and 7 times I have taken one who looks like me, who might have understood what was taken from me. But they don't understand. They never understand. They're free, comfortable, American in ways I never got to be. So I make them feel it. The cold, the fear, the dying alone in a place that should have been home." Sanders stepped between the thing and Griffin. "Keiko Yamamoto, that's your name. You were a ranger here. You loved these trees. They took that from you. But Luna Griffin didn't. These other women didn't. They're innocent." "I was innocent," the thing hissed. "I was American. I wore this uniform with pride. I guided children through the giant forest. I taught them about sequoias, about ecosystems, about preservation. And they took me to a desert prison and let me freeze because of my grandmother's birthplace. Where is the justice? Where is the understanding? Where is the punishment for those who destroyed my life?" "They're gone," Sanders said, his voice shaking but determined. "Everyone responsible for the internment is dead. The politicians who signed Executive Order 9066, the generals who built the camps, the guards who watched the wire, all dead. The camp is closed. It's been a National Historic Site since 1992, preserved as a reminder of what we did wrong. Executive Order 9066 was formally rescinded. There were reparations in 1988, 46 years late, but they came. President Reagan apologized on behalf of the nation. The government acknowledged that internment was wrong, unjust, based on race prejudice and war hysteria. Justice is imperfect, and it came too late for you, but it came. You're punishing people who had nothing to do with what happened to you. People who weren't even born when you died." The thing's hair spread further across the floor like black water, strands wrapping around Griffin's ankles with the slow inevitability of vines reclaiming a structure. "Justice is cold comfort to the frozen. Apologies are empty words to the empty dead. Do you know what it's like to die of exposure, young ranger? Your extremities go numb first. Fingers, toes, nose, ears. You stop feeling pain and start feeling nothing, which is somehow worse. Your thinking becomes confused. You make poor decisions. You start to feel warm even though you're freezing, and you want to remove your clothes because the cold has become heat in your dying brain. I walked 60 miles through December desert, through mountain passes, trying to get back to my trees, to my home, to the one place I'd felt belonging. And I died within sight of them. So close I could smell the sequoia bark. Close enough to touch if I'd had just one more mile of strength. I died reaching for home, and America, the country I'd pledged allegiance to, the country I'd served in uniform. America killed me as surely as if they'd shot me themselves." The thing's hair spread further, black strands wrapping around Griffin's ankles. "Justice is cold comfort to the frozen. Apologies are empty words to the empty dead. I take what was taken from me. Futures, warmth, belonging. Every December 7th I remind America what it did. Every year I make one person feel what I felt. It's not enough, it will never be enough, but it's all I have." Sanders felt the temperature dropping, frost forming on his breath, his extremities going numb. The building around them was changing, walls becoming translucent, and through them, Sanders could see both the giant forest and somewhere else. A desert valley, rows of tar paper barracks, guard towers, searchlights cutting through December darkness. 2 places existing simultaneously, separated by 60 miles and 76 years, but connected by grief and cold and injustice. Luna Griffin was fading, her skin taking on that same frost-covered quality as Keiko's manifestation. She was being consumed, transformed, added to whatever this entity had become. Sanders did the only thing he could think of. He pulled out his phone, found the photograph he'd downloaded earlier. The 1941 park employee photo showing a young, smiling Keiko Yamamoto in her ranger uniform, proud and happy and alive. "This is you," he said, holding the phone toward the manifestation. "Before the camps, before the cold, this is who you were. Keiko Yamamoto, seasonal naturalist, age 24. You loved these trees. You wanted to protect them. That person, that ranger, she wouldn't do this. She wouldn't hurt innocent people. She wouldn't become the thing that destroyed her." The manifestation looked at the photograph, and for a moment its features softened, became more human. "I remember her, that girl. She believed in fairness, in duty, in service. She thought if she worked hard and followed rules and loved this country, it would love her back. She was naive, foolish. She died learning better." "She died," Sanders agreed. "But you're still here. You're not Keiko Yamamoto anymore. You're what hate created. You're the same injustice you suffered, just wearing a different face. And that girl in this photograph would be ashamed of what you've become." The thing screamed. The sound breaking glass that didn't exist, shattering ice, fracturing reality itself. The barracks building dissolved, the desert camp faded, and they were back in the giant forest, surrounded by ancient sequoias, Luna Griffin gasping on the ground as warmth returned to her body. But the manifestation remained, its form less solid now, more suggestion than substance. It looked at Sanders with those glowing eyes and spoke in a voice that held centuries of sorrow. "You're right. She would be ashamed. I am ashamed. But I don't know how to stop. The cold is all I remember, the anger is all I feel. Every December 7th I wake to it again, and I need to share it, need someone else to understand, need to be remembered," Sanders finished. "Not for how you died, but for how you lived. Keiko Yamamoto, ranger, naturalist, guardian of these trees. That's who deserves to be remembered." The manifestation reached toward him with a hand that was more frost than flesh. "Will you remember? Will anyone remember past the camps, past the cold, past the dying? Will anyone remember the girl who loved these trees?" "Yes," Sanders said. "I promise. I'll make sure people know. I'll put a plaque here at General Sherman. Not about the disappearances, but about you. Keiko Yamamoto, park ranger who gave her life in service to Sequoia. People will see it every day. They'll remember." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the manifestation began to fade, frost sublimating to vapor, vapor to nothing. As it disappeared, Sanders heard a final whisper. "Thank you. Let me rest now. Let me be warm." Then she was gone, and they were alone in the giant forest with dawn beginning to gray the eastern sky. Luna Griffin sat up slowly, confused and disoriented. What happened? "I remember setting up camp, then nothing until I was somewhere cold, and then you were there, and—" "You were hypothermic," Sanders said, the lie forming easily. "Onset was rapid, probably altitude affecting your body differently than expected. I got you to an emergency shelter, got you warmed up. You're going to be okay." It was easier to lie than to try explaining the truth. Griffin was alive, safe, and would never need to know about vengeful spirits or temporal displacement or the price of historical injustice. They hiked back to the trailhead as the sun rose, painting the sequoias gold and red. Sanders radioed in, reported that he'd found Griffin experiencing medical distress and was bringing her to the ranger station for evaluation. His supervisor would be angry about unauthorized overnight camping, but that was a problem for later. At the station, after Griffin had been checked by EMTs and released with instructions to hydrate and rest, Chief Ranger Morse pulled Sanders into her office. "You want to explain what the hell you were doing out there?" she demanded. Sanders explained about the pattern he'd found, the 7 disappearances, his concern for Griffin's safety. Morse listened with an expression that shifted from anger to concern to something thoughtful. "I've been here 12 years, she said finally. "I knew about those cold cases. Never saw the pattern because I never looked for it. December 7th. Always December 7th. She paused. "There's something you should know. In 1943, the Park Service dedicated a memorial grove to employees who served in World War II. But there was one name that was supposed to be included and wasn't: Keiko Yamamoto. She died in December 1942, technically an employee death in the line of service. But because she died at Manzanar, they didn't include her. Didn't want to draw attention to the internment. It was erased from official record. Sanders felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Can we change that? Can we add her name now? Morse considered this. It would require going through channels, historical review, approval from the National Park Service. Could take years. Or, Sanders said, we could do it quietly. A small memorial plaque, just acknowledging her service. Nothing official, just remembering. Morse looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You draft the text, I'll approve it. We'll install it before next December. Sanders spent the next week researching Keiko Yamamoto's life with an intensity that surprised even him. He contacted the National Archives requesting files on Manzanar internees. He reached out to Japanese American historical societies, to descendant communities, to anyone who might have information about a young woman who'd worked for the Park Service in 1940, 1942. He found records of her birth in Sacramento on March 15, 1918. Found her high school yearbook photo, her graduation announcement in the Sacramento Bee. She'd been valedictorian, had studied biology at the University of California, had written her senior thesis on giant sequoia ecology. The Park Service had hired her in June 1940 as a seasonal naturalist, a prestigious position for a woman at that time, especially a Japanese-American woman. He found letters she'd written to friends, preserved in archives. In one dated October 1941, she wrote, I lead tours through the giant forest almost every day now. The visitors, especially the children, are so curious, so eager to learn. Yesterday, a little boy asked me how old the General Sherman is, and when I told him perhaps 2,300 years, he couldn't comprehend it. I told him this tree was alive during the Roman Empire, and his eyes went wide. These moments are why I do this work. These trees deserve protection, deserve reverence, and helping people understand that feels sacred. He found her hiring records, her performance evaluations, all excellent, her ranger certification from February 1941. He found a photograph of her standing beside the General Sherman, dwarfed by its massive trunk, her ranger hat tilted at a jaunty angle, genuine joy on her young face. This photo became his favorite. It captured who she'd been before everything went wrong, before the war, before the camps, before the dying. He found the dark turn in her story through Executive Order 9066 records. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed the order authorizing military zones from which people could be excluded. On March 24, 1942, the Park Service had terminated Keiko's employment due to national security concerns. On April 2, 1942, she'd been relocated to the Merced Assembly Center, a temporary facility where Japanese Americans were held while the permanent camps were constructed. On May 31, 1942, she'd been transferred to Manzanar. He found her death certificate from Manzanar, the sparse details. Exposure, December 7, 1942. He found evidence that she'd tried to return to Sequoia after the riots, had walked into the desert heading west, had died somewhere between the camp and the mountains she loved. He drafted memorial text, in memory of Keiko Yamamoto, 1918-1942, seasonal ranger and naturalist, who dedicated her life to the preservation of the giant forest. Her love for these ancient trees and her service to this park will not be forgotten. The plaque was installed on November 28, 2018, mounted on a boulder near the General Sherman tree. Sanders stood alone at the installation, watching workers secure it in place, and whispered, "You're remembered now, not for how you died but for how you lived. Rest easy, Ranger Yamamoto." December 7th, 2018 came and went without incident. No disappearances, no manifestations, no cold spots or temporal anomalies. Just a normal December day in Sequoia National Park. Sanders visited the memorial plaque often over the following months, maintaining it, cleaning it, making sure it remained visible. Tourists would stop, read the inscription, sometimes take photographs. A few would comment on the dates. Quick math revealing she'd only been 24 when she died. So young, they'd say. What happened to her? And Sanders would tell them, not about the manifestation or the disappearances, but about the internment camps, about Executive Order 9066, about the injustice that had taken a young ranger from the trees she loved and killed her in a desert prison. Some listeners cried. Some thanked him for sharing the history. All of them left with a better understanding of what had been done and why it mattered to remember. Luna Griffin visited the park again in spring 2019, apologizing for not thanking Sanders properly after her medical emergency. She'd brought a gift, a photograph she'd taken of the General Sherman tree at sunrise, December 7th, 2018. The light in the image was extraordinary, golden and pure, illuminating the massive sequoia like a cathedral. I don't remember taking this, she admitted. My camera recorded it, but I don't remember the moment. But I'm glad it exists. It's beautiful. Sanders hung the photograph in his ranger station office, a reminder of the night reality had fractured, of the spirit he'd helped release, of the injustice he'd helped acknowledge. And sometimes, when December 7th approached each year, he'd visit the memorial plaque and spend a few minutes in silence, honoring a ranger who'd given everything for trees that would outlive them all. The giant forest stood as it always had, sequoias reaching toward the sky, roots intertwined beneath the earth, bearing witness to human joy and human sorrow, with the patient indifference of things that measure time in millennia. And somewhere in the space between wood and memory, between history and present, a young ranger finally rested, her story remembered, her service acknowledged, her love for these ancient trees eternal. Eric Sanders learned many things in his first year as a park ranger. He learned that patterns mattered, that history wasn't past, but persistent. That injustice left scars that time alone couldn't heal. That sometimes the best thing you could do was simply remember. Remember the people who came before, the wrongs they suffered, the love they gave despite everything. And he learned that the forests were older than nations, deeper than politics, and they remembered everything, holding within their rings all the joy and sorrow humans had brought to their shade across the centuries. The sequoias would stand long after Sanders retired, long after his generation passed. But as long as he drew breath, he would make sure that Keiko Yamamoto's story was told, that her service was honored, that her love for these trees was remembered. It was the least he could do, the very least. And sometimes on December 7th each year, when Sanders visited the memorial plaque, he felt warmth despite the winter cold, and smelled something impossibly far away. Not frost or death or desert, but the scent of living wood, of sequoia bark, of home. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened to Keiko. Douglas Mackenzie found the photograph pinned to his locker door with a rusted nail, his own face taken from an angle that suggested someone had been standing in the trees behind his cabin for weeks. In the image, barely visible in the background blur, a pale figure in white stood among the moss-draped Sitka spruces, long black hair obscuring where a face should be. The photograph was dated 3 days from now. He stood in the ranger station locker room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and felt his throat constrict in that familiar way. The same tightness that had plagued him since the accident 3 years ago. Since Alex had slipped on ice-slicked granite and fallen into the ravine while Douglas screamed his name into wind that swallowed sound. The mandatory therapy sessions had taught him breathing techniques. None of them worked when his hands started shaking like this. Douglas pulled the photograph free, careful not to touch the nail. The image quality was poor, grainy, like it had been printed on cheap paper, but the date stamp in the corner was clear, November 18th, 2011. Today was November 15th. He turned it over. On the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize, a single word in what might have been Japanese characters. He couldn't read it, but something about the brush strokes made his stomach turn. "Mackenzie, you seen the bulletin?" Sarah Donnelly's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, her NPS uniform still wet from the perpetual mist that characterized the Hoh rainforest in November. Missing hiker, 26-year-old male, 3 days overdue. Went up the Hoh River Trail solo? Your primary? Of course he was. Douglas had been avoiding overnight searches since his return to duty 6 months ago, taking only day shifts, staying close to headquarters. But Olympic National Park was short-staffed in the off-season, and his 14 years of experience, 12 before the accident, 2 after he'd finally stopped having panic attacks every time he saw a rope, made him the obvious choice. Who is it? His voice came out steady. Another thing therapy had taught him. Fake it until the body believes the lie. Ethan Cross, software engineer from Seattle, experienced hiker. Last contact was a text to his girlfriend 4 days ago from mile marker 12. Said he was camping near the Olympus guard station ruins. Sarah handed him the file. Weather's been clear, temp in the mid-40s. Should have been a straightforward trip. Douglas looked at the missing person's photo. Ethan Cross had dark hair, a confident smile, the kind of face that suggested someone who'd never seriously considered his own mortality. 26. The same age Alex had been. "I'll head out at first light," Douglas said, then caught himself. "Actually, I'll leave now. Those clouds coming in from the Pacific look like rain by dawn." Sarah nodded, her expression softening slightly. She knew. Everyone at the station knew about Alex, about the 6 months of medical leave, about the psychiatrist's reports that had nearly ended his career. They also knew not to mention it. Douglas packed his gear with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Garmin GPS Map 62s, he'd upgraded from his old E-Trex after the accident, needed something with better satellite acquisition in deep canyons. Motorola XPR 7550 radio, though signal would be shit once he got more than 5 miles in. First aid kit weighted for overnight trauma scenarios. Bench-made bushcrafter knife. 50 feet of sterling 9mm rope that he'd checked and rechecked 3 times before packing because his hands still trembled when he tied knots. He left the photograph on his desk, then, after a moment's hesitation, slipped it into his jacket pocket. The Hoh rainforest at dusk existed in a permanent state of green twilight. Douglas had grown up in the Pacific Northwest, had worked Olympic National Park for over a decade, but the old-growth forest still unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. The Sitka spruces rose 300 feet overhead, their trunks wrapped in club moss that glowed faintly luminescent in the fading light. Sword ferns carpeted the understory in dense prehistoric abundance. Everything dripped. The air itself felt liquid, heavy with moisture that condensed on exposed skin and made breathing feel like drowning by degrees. He made good time on the maintained trail, his headlamp cutting a narrow corridor through the darkness. By 9 p.m., he'd covered 8 miles and found the first sign. Ethan Cross's name in the trail register at the junction near Elk Lake. The signature was confident, the letters well-formed. Nothing suggesting distress. Douglas continued. At mile marker 12, he found the campsite. Ethan's tent was still standing, a high-end mountain hardware backpacking model staked properly into the soft earth. No signs of animal interference, no damage to the fabric. Douglas approached slowly, every nerve ending screaming at him to turn around. The tent fly was zipped closed. He called out, "Ethan Cross, this is Park Service," and received only the sound of water dripping from a million leaves. Inside the tent, everything was organized with unnatural precision. Sleeping bag folded, camp stove disassembled and packed, food bag hung properly from a nearby branch to prevent bear access. But Ethan's phone was there, sitting on top of his sleeping pad, battery dead. His wallet, his car keys. Everything except the person himself. Douglas backed out and surveyed the area with his flashlight. No footprints leading away. The constant rain had erased any tracks older than a few hours. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just an abandoned camp that looked like its occupant had simply evaporated mid-task. Then he saw the trees. 6 Sitka spruces in a perfect circle around the campsite, each with a strip of white cloth tied around its trunk at exactly eye level. The fabric was silk, expensive, incongruous with the wilderness setting. Douglas moved closer to examine one and his breath caught. The cloth was covered in Japanese characters, hand-painted in what looked like red ink, or blood. The brushwork was identical to the character on the back of the photograph. His radio crackled. Static burst through, then Sarah's voice, distorted. "Mackenzie, weather update, storm front moving faster than..." The signal died. He tried to respond, got nothing but dead air. Normal for this terrain, but his pulse still accelerated. Douglas made camp 50 yards from Ethan's tent, following protocol. Never contaminate a potential crime scene. As he set up his own shelter, he felt it for the first time. The sensation of being watched. Not the ambient awareness of animals in the forest, but focused attention, intelligent and malevolent. He turned slowly, scanning the darkness beyond his headlamp's reach. Nothing, just moss-draped trees and the endless whisper of rain that wasn't quite falling but saturated everything anyway. Inside his tent, Douglas tried to sleep. Failed. At 2 a.m., he gave up and sat listening to the forest. The sounds were wrong. Olympic's old growth was normally alive with noise. Owls, elk, the rustle of Roosevelt deer moving through underbrush. Tonight, silence. Absolute and suffocating. His satellite messenger chirped. A text from headquarters, barely coherent through the cloud cover. Pattern, 3 previous, 1987, 1999, full moon, similar. The message cut off. He tried to reply, couldn't get a signal. 3 previous what? Disappearances? He pulled out his trail map, spreading it across his sleeping bag. If there was a pattern, he needed to know. Then he heard it. A woman's voice, singing. The melody was Japanese. He didn't understand the words but recognized the linguistic rhythm. It came from somewhere northeast, deeper into the forest, away from the trail. Douglas unzipped his tent, stepped into the mist. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour. His breath came out in clouds despite it being early November in a temperate rainforest where it rarely froze. His thermometer read 38 degrees, but his exposed skin burned with cold that felt arctic. The singing continued, soft and sad, threading through the trees. Every instinct told him to stay put, wait for dawn, radio for backup. But that voice, something about it pulled at him. Not seductive. Worse. Familiar. It sounded like grief, like the crying he'd done in the dark months after Alex died. The sound of someone who'd lost everything and found something terrible in the emptiness. He followed it. The forest changed as he moved off trail. The trees grew denser, their branches interlocking overhead to block even the faint moonlight. His headlamp revealed shapes that didn't quite make sense. Moss hanging in patterns that suggested figures, shadows that moved against the direction of his light. After 20 minutes of bushwhacking, he found her. She stood in a small clearing, her back to him, wearing a white kimono that glowed faintly in the darkness. Long black hair fell past her waist, so long it pooled on the forest floor. She was barefoot on the wet moss, and she shouldn't have been there. Not in November, not in the Olympic wilderness, not singing in Japanese while everything around her slowly died. Because that's what was happening. Douglas could see it even in the limited light. The sword ferns nearest her had browned and wilted. The moss had gone gray. The very air seemed to congeal around her presence. Ethan Cross? His voice came out hoarse. Are you Ethan Cross? She stopped singing. The silence that followed felt like pressure, like being underwater at depth. Douglas's ears popped. His vision swam. He reached for his radio, fumbled it, and the Motorola fell into the ferns with a muffled thud. The woman turned. He caught a glimpse of her face. Wrong, all wrong. Skin too pale, features too sharp. Eyes that were holes rather than organs. And then his training kicked in. He ran. Branches tore at his jacket. Roots grabbed at his boots. Behind him, that singing resumed, closer now, and with it came cold that burned his lungs with each breath. He crashed through the understory, his headlamp beam jerking wildly, desperately trying to find his campsite, the trail, anything familiar. He burst through a curtain of hanging moss and nearly fell over his own tent. Douglas dove inside, zipped it closed with shaking hands, knowing how useless nylon would be against whatever that thing was. His breath came in ragged gasps. His heart hammered against his ribs hard enough to hurt. The singing stopped. He waited, listening. Rain began to fall. Real rain now, drumming against the tent fly. Normal sound. Natural. He checked his watch. 3:47 a.m., hours until dawn. Something brushed against the outside of his tent. The nylon depressed inward, the shape of a hand with fingers too long, pressing against the fabric near his head. Douglas scrambled backward, pressed against the opposite wall. Every muscle locked. The hand moved, tracing down the tent wall slowly, deliberately. Then it withdrew. He sat in the darkness, too terrified to move, and waited for dawn. It came eventually, pale and gray, filtering through the canopy with agonizing slowness. When enough light penetrated the forest for him to see, Douglas emerged from his tent and found his campsite ringed with the same white silk strips he'd seen at Ethan's camp. Someone, something, had tied them to the surrounding trees while he'd cowered inside. Each one was marked with fresh red characters. He packed his gear with mechanical efficiency, the motions automatic, his mind refusing to process what he'd seen. Hallucination, hypothermia-induced psychosis, carbon monoxide from his camp stove, though he'd barely used it. Any explanation except the one his lizard brain kept screaming. You saw a ghost. You saw a Uri. You saw death walking in white. Douglas retrieved his radio from where he'd dropped it and found it crushed. The casing cracked, electronics scattered in the moss. He hadn't stepped on it. Something else had. The trail back felt longer. The forest pressed in on all sides, the trees seeming to lean inward, the moss hanging lower. He passed Ethan's abandoned campsite and forced himself to search it more thoroughly in daylight. Found nothing new. Just the organized gear of someone who'd disappeared without cause or trace. At mile marker 8, he found the second campsite. This one was old. The tent had collapsed, the poles rusted, vegetation growing through the fabric. But the arrangement was identical. Gear meticulously organized, personal effects left behind, white silk markers on the surrounding trees. Douglas checked the tent's interior, found a wallet. The driver's license inside showed a woman named Katie Yamamoto. Issue date 1999. She smiled at the camera, young and alive, not knowing she'd become another statistic in whatever pattern was playing out in this forest. He took photos with his backup camera, documented everything. His hands had stopped shaking. The terror had crystallized into something else, something colder and more focused. This wasn't random. This wasn't natural. And he was alone with it. At mile marker 4, as the maintained trail widened and civilization beckoned, Douglas found the third site. This one was ancient, barely recognizable as human habitation, but the white silk remained, faded but intact, impossible preservation, suggesting something beyond normal decay. Beneath a rotted tarp, he found a corroded metal ammo box. Inside, papers, journal entries dating to 1987. The handwriting was frantic, deteriorating across pages. Day 7. The singing started again last night. Japanese folk song, I think. Dr. Tanaka would know, but he's gone like the others. She's getting closer. Day 9. Found Tanaka's camera. All the photos show her in the background. Even the ones we took months ago before any of this started. She was always there. Day 11. I understand now. The legend is real. The woman who died here 1945, end of the war. Internment camp unofficial. They brought her to the forest to silence her. She won't stay silent. The journal ended mid-sentence on day 13. Douglas sat on a fallen log, the journal in his lap, and felt the pieces falling into place. The white silk, funeral markers. The red characters, Buddhist sutras for the dead. The woman in the kimono, Onryo, a vengeful spirit bound to the location of her death. Japanese folklore made real in the Pacific Northwest wilderness. But why these people? Why Ethan Cross, Katie Yamamoto, the nameless researcher from 1987? He flipped through more pages and found it. A roster, names and dates. Japanese Americans sent to an unofficial detention site in Olympic National Forest during World War II. Most were released when the war ended. 6 were not accounted for. 6 who disappeared into official silence. Katie Yamamoto. Her surname was on the list. Different Katie. Grandmother or great-aunt maybe, but the same family. The researcher from 1987, his notes mentioned he was documenting the internment camp's history, trying to expose the cover-up. Ethan Cross. Douglas pulled out his phone, searched with his weak remaining battery. Software engineer, yes, but also amateur genealogist. His blog documented his attempt to trace his mother's family, the Nakamura line, which had disappeared from records in 1945. They weren't random victims. They were witnesses, descendants, truth-tellers. And Douglas. He looked at the photograph again, at the date that had now passed. November 18th. 2 days ago, he'd survived it. Or had he? His reflection in his compass caught his attention. He looked different, paler, the shadows under his eyes deeper. His hair had more gray than it had 3 days ago. A sound made him look up. That singing again, distant but approaching. Douglas ran. He made it to the ranger station by dusk, burst through the door wild-eyed and covered in mud. Sarah was there, filing reports, and she jumped at his entrance. "Jesus, Mackenzie, you look like hell. Did you find Cross?" "Call County Sheriff," Douglas gasped. "Need cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, historical records. There's a mass grave out there, Sarah. Internment camp victims, and something's guarding it." Sarah stared at him. "Doug, slow down, what are you talking about?" He tried to explain. The campsites, the journal, the pattern. But as he spoke, he watched her face shift from concern to something worse. Pity. "Mackenzie," she said gently, "you've been gone for 36 hours. I sent Thompson out to check on you when you didn't radio in. He found your tent at mile marker 12, said it looked abandoned. No sign of you. That's impossible. I was hiking back, I found 3 sites, there was a journal from 1987. Doug." She pulled up something on her computer. "There's no record of anyone named Katie Yamamoto going missing in 1999. I checked after Thompson called in. And that researcher you're talking about? The records show the 1987 expedition completed successfully. Everyone came back." His hands started shaking again. No, I saw them. The tent, the gear, the journal." "The same way you saw Alex after the accident?" Sarah's voice was quiet. "The same way you kept seeing him in your cabin for months, kept hearing his voice on the radio?" Douglas stepped back. "This is different." "Is it? Or is this another breakdown, Doug? You're not ready for overnight searches. The psych eval said so. I shouldn't have let you go." He looked at her, at the genuine concern in her face, and felt reality slipping. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd hallucinated everything. The stress, the isolation, the anniversary of Alex's death approaching. His mind could have constructed an elaborate delusion. Then he felt it. Cold air on the back of his neck despite the heater running. He turned slowly. She stood in the corner of the station office, barely visible in the fluorescent light. Long black hair, white kimono, face like hunger, like grief, like justice delayed for 70 years. "Do you see her?" Douglas whispered. Sarah followed his gaze. "See what?" The woman moved forward. Sarah didn't react, kept staring at the empty corner where Douglas saw a ghost. The temperature in the room dropped, his breath misted, frost formed on the windows. "Sarah, run," Douglas said. "There's nothing there, Doug, you need help. Let me call Dr. Morrison." The lights went out. In the darkness, that singing started. Sarah screamed, finally seeing, finally understanding. Douglas heard her stumble backward, heard office supplies scatter. He fumbled for his flashlight, clicked it on. The beam revealed the woman standing between them, her face now visible in terrible detail. She'd been young when she died, early 20s, with features that suggested she'd been beautiful before whatever had been done to her. Now her skin was translucent, showing shadows of bone beneath. Her eyes were gone, leaving cavities that wept something darker than blood. Her mouth moved, forming words in Japanese that Douglas's hindbrain understood even though his conscious mind did not. You will witness. You will remember. You will tell truth they buried. The temperature plummeted further. Douglas's flashlight dimmed, the batteries dying in the impossible cold. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the woman reaching toward Sarah with hands that ended in broken fingernails, reaching past her, reaching for something beyond. He woke in a hospital bed in Port Angeles. The fluorescent lights hurt his eyes. A doctor he didn't recognize was checking his vitals, making notes on a tablet. Welcome back, Mr. Mackenzie. You had us worried. Severe hypothermia, exposure, dehydration. You're lucky Ranger Donnelly found you when she did. Sarah? His voice was gravel. Is she okay? She's fine. Shaken up, but fine. Said you collapsed in the station, started seizing. We've run some tests. What did she tell you? Douglas tried to sit up, fell back against the pillows. About what she saw? The doctor's expression became professionally neutral. She said you had a psychotic episode. Given your history, we're recommending psychiatric evaluation before you return to duty. My history. Douglas laughed, the sound bitter. The breakdown after Alex died. Yeah, that's what everyone thinks this is. Isn't it? The doctor's voice was kind but firm. Mr. Mackenzie, you were found unconscious in the ranger station with a core body temperature of 92 degrees. In a heated building. The human mind can create very convincing hallucinations under extreme stress. Douglas closed his eyes. Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe everything in the forest had been delusion, trauma, the anniversary of Alex's death triggering a complete break with reality. But then why could he still smell the incense? Why did his reflection in the hospital room's mirror show someone standing behind him? Someone in white with long black hair. He was released 3 days later with a prescription for antipsychotics he didn't fill and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation scheduled for next week. Sarah picked him up, drove him home in uncomfortable silence. I'm sorry, Douglas said finally, for scaring you. You should have told someone you were struggling. Sarah kept her eyes on the road. We all loved Alex too. We would have understood. I know. They drove through Forks, the small logging town that serviced Olympic National Park, past shops closing for winter and diners where rangers ate lunch. Everything looked normal. The world had continued turning while Douglas had lost his mind in the forest. Sarah pulled into his cabin's driveway. The department's putting you on medical leave, paid. Take some time, work with Dr. Morrison, get right again. Yeah. Douglas got out, grabbed his bag from the back seat. Thanks for the ride. He watched her drive away, then turned toward his cabin and froze. White silk strips hung from every tree in his yard, dozens of them, each marked with red characters that he now recognized as memorial prayers for the dead. His front door stood open. Douglas walked forward slowly, knowing he should run, should call someone, should do anything except enter, but his feet carried him forward anyway, through the door into his living room. She sat in his chair, the woman from the forest, more solid now, more real. Her kimono was clean, pristine white, and Douglas could see details he'd missed before. The fabric was hand-embroidered with cranes, the obi tied in a style that was specific to a particular region of Japan, everything authentic to the mid-1940s. You're real, he whispered. She inclined her head slightly. When she spoke, her voice was clear, unaccented English. I am what remains when truth is buried, when justice is denied, when the dead are forgotten. Douglas sank onto his couch, his legs giving out. What do you want? To be remembered, to be acknowledged, to have the truth told. She looked at him with those hollow eyes. 6 of us were brought to the forest in 1945. The government said we were security risks. Enemy sympathizers. They took us from the internment camps, brought us to that place in the Ho, and they killed us. Buried us in unmarked graves. Told our families we'd been relocated again, transferred, released. Lies upon lies. I saw the journal, the researcher. Found the truth and they silenced him, made it disappear, changed the records. Her form flickered, becoming less solid. But every 12 years, on the anniversary, I can reach through. I can touch the living world. And I find those who seek truth, who have connection to what was done. Ethan Cross? His great-grandmother was one of the 6. He was researching his family history, getting too close to the truth. So I showed him. Her voice hardened. I showed him everything they did. The fear, the pain, the casual cruelty of bureaucrats who decided we were inconvenient. And I gave him a choice. Bear witness or become another disappearance, another adjusted record. What did he choose? He ran. Most run. They see the truth and they run from it because remembering is harder than forgetting. She stood, moved toward him. But you're different. You already know what it means to lose someone, to have their death turned into paperwork and official reports that erase who they were. Douglas thought of Alex, of the investigation report that had labeled it Ranger Error, of how quickly the department had moved on. Yes. You're haunted already, so I'm asking, will you bear witness? Will you tell what was done here? Will you make them remember us? He looked at her, at this impossible thing that was both ghost story and historical atrocity, both supernatural horror and bureaucratic evil made manifest. If I say no, then you join the others. Another disappearance. Another person who got too close to truth that powerful people want forgotten. She leaned closer, and her breath smelled like earth, like decades of decay. But you won't say no, because you understand that being forgotten is worse than death, that having your truth erased is the real horror. Douglas stood on shaking legs. What do I do? Dig. Find the graves, make them acknowledge what happened. Force the truth into daylight. She reached out, her hand hovering over his chest. I'll show you where we're buried. But you have to promise. No matter what they say, no matter who tells you it's impossible or that you're crazy, you don't stop. You make them see. I promise. Her hand touched his chest and Douglas felt cold shoot through every nerve ending. The world spun, and suddenly he was elsewhere, elsewhen, watching through eyes that weren't his own. 6 women kneeling in the forest, men in uniform standing over them. The crack of gunfire, bodies falling. Hasty graves dug in volcanic soil, paperwork being altered. A conspiracy of silence that would last decades. Then he was back in his cabin, on his knees, gasping. The woman was fading, her form becoming transparent. The coordinates are in your mind now, she said, her voice distant. Tell our story, Douglas Mackenzie. Tell them we existed, that we mattered, that we're still here. She disappeared. Douglas sat in the silence of his cabin, his mind racing. Everyone would think he was insane. The psychiatric evaluation would probably end his career. But he pulled out his phone anyway, started making calls. Investigative journalists, civil rights organizations, historians who specialized in the internment camps. Some hung up immediately, but others listened. And slowly, over the following weeks, a team began to assemble. Researchers, ground-penetrating radar operators, people who believed that truth mattered more than convenience. 3 months later, they found the graves. 6 bodies, buried in a clearing off the Ho River Trail, exactly where the coordinates in Douglas's mind had indicated. Forensic anthropologists confirmed they were Japanese-American women, killed in the 1940s. Documents were uncovered, hidden, misfiled, deliberately obscured but not quite destroyed. The conspiracy unraveled. The news coverage was extensive. Families of the victims were located. Remains returned for proper burial. Government apologies were issued. A memorial was erected. Douglas attended the dedication ceremony in the spring. The forest was green and alive, the moss glowing in scattered sunlight. Families of the 6 women stood together, finally able to mourn properly after 70 years. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, Douglas lingered. He felt her presence before he saw her, that familiar cold, that sense of being watched. But when she appeared this time, she looked different, younger. The hollow eyes had filled with something like peace. Her kimono, while still white, seemed to glow with actual light rather than ghostly luminescence. "Thank you," she said simply. "Are you free now?" Douglas asked. "Can you rest?" She smiled, and it transformed her face into what she must have looked like before the forest, before the guns, before 70 years of rage. "We're remembered now. That's what mattered. The truth is known." "Will I see you again?" "No, you've earned your peace too." She began to fade. "And Douglas? Alex wants you to know it wasn't your fault. The ice was treacherous. The wind was strong. Some things just happen. Let him go." She disappeared for the last time. Douglas stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by new memorial stones bearing the names of the 6 women who'd been murdered and forgotten. He felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of guilt and grief that had been strangling him for 3 years. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe everything had been hallucination and coincidence and his damaged mind finding patterns in chaos. But the graves were real. The bodies were real. The truth was real. And if the price of uncovering that truth was carrying the ghost of a woman who refused to be forgotten, Douglas Mackenzie thought that was a price worth paying. He returned to work 6 months later, cleared by Dr. Morrison, who noted significant improvement in his mental health. Sarah welcomed him back with cautious optimism. He took assignments in the Hoh rainforest without hesitation, hiked those trails where he'd first encountered the impossible. The forest felt different now, still ancient, still heavy with moisture and moss, but the oppressive weight was gone. The silence was natural silence. The shadows were just shadows. But sometimes, on the anniversary of the day he'd found Ethan Cross's empty campsite, Douglas would wake to find a single strip of white silk hanging from his cabin's porch. No characters written on it anymore, no threat or warning. Just a reminder. Some truths refuse to stay buried. Some debts outlast death. And some ghosts haunt us not because they hate us, but because they need us to remember. Douglas remembered. He always would. And in the quiet moments when the forest whispered its secrets and the mist rolled through ancient trees, he thought he could still hear singing, soft and sad and finally at peace. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Rachel Patel had learned to ignore the whispers. Not the wind through Douglas fir needles or the creaks of old-growth cedars. Those sounds belonged to the forest and made sense. She meant the other kind, the ones that started at the base of her skull like tinnitus and unfurled into almost words and languages she'd never studied. The ranger training at Albright had taught her about hypothermia, wildlife encounters, and crisis de-escalation. Nobody mentioned what to do when you could feel locations the way other people felt textures, when certain trails made your teeth ache for no medical reason. So she'd learned to smile through the sensation, to nod when other rangers called the Hoh peaceful, to never mention that the deeper sections felt like walking into a scream that hadn't finished yet. 3 years at Olympic National Park, and she'd gotten good at the performance. Good enough that the other rangers stopped giving her concerned looks when she hesitated before entering certain areas. Good enough that she'd almost convinced herself the sensitivity was just anxiety, just the overactive pattern recognition of a mind that read too much into coincidence. Almost. The call about Tyler Dawson came through at 14:47 on a Thursday in October. Rachel had been updating trail condition reports at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center, half listening to the usual static-laden radio chatter. Dispatch was Marnie Cross, 22 years with the Park Service, voice like gravel even on clear days. Any ranger in the Hoh sector, we've got a concerned party reporting overdue hiker. Male, 26, solo backpacker. Last contact was yesterday morning, 0800 hours. Planned route was Hall of Mosses extending into the restricted old-growth section. Permit shows he had authorization for the research trail. Rachel's pen stopped moving. The research trail. The one that wound deeper into the rainforest than tourists were allowed, through sections where the canopy grew so dense that GPS signals became suggestions rather than facts. The one that made her fillings hurt. She picked up her radio. Patel here. I can respond. What's the PLS? Research Trailhead Junction, about 2 miles past Hall of Mosses. Sister reported he called her yesterday morning, said he'd found something interesting and was going to investigate. Line went dead mid-sentence. She assumed it was cell coverage, but when he didn't check in last night as planned, she got worried. Copy, I'll head out now. Rachel gathered her gear with practiced efficiency. Garmin Dakota 20 GPS, freshly charged, but she packed spare batteries anyway. The hoe had a reputation for draining electronics faster than it should. Motorola XTS 5000 radio, medical kit, headlamp, emergency bivouac. The bench-made bushcrafter knife she'd inherited from her father, its handle worn smooth from his grip and now hers. She tried not to think about how the base of her skull had started buzzing the moment Marnie mentioned the research trail. The thing about the Hoh rainforest was its silence. Not the absence of sound. The place was never quiet, always dripping, always rustling. But the way sound behaved wrong. Echoes came from directions they shouldn't. Distances compressed and expanded. Rachel had learned to trust her ears less than her instincts here, which was a problem when her instincts were currently screaming at her to turn around. She passed the Hall of Mosses tourist trail at 15:30. The October afternoon was already dimming, filtered through countless layers of maple and cedar and Sitka spruce. Moss covered everything in shades of green so varied they seemed almost artificial, like someone had adjusted the saturation too high. The air tasted of decomposition and growth happening simultaneously, of things becoming other things. The research trail junction appeared exactly where her GPS indicated, though she'd somehow expected it to be elsewhere. A small weathered sign read, "Authorized personnel only. Permit required." Beyond it, the path narrowed to barely shoulder width, hemmed in by sword ferns taller than she was. Rachel pulled out her radio. Patel to base. I'm at the research trail junction. Beginning search. Marnie's response came through unusually clear. Copy that. Be careful in there, Rachel. That section gets dark fast. The buzzing in Rachel's skull intensified as she stepped past the sign. She'd gone maybe a quarter mile when she found the first prayer strip. It hung from a low cedar branch. White fabric twisted around itself, covered in characters she couldn't read, but somehow recognized as Japanese. The fabric looked old, weathered by years of rain and mist, but the knot holding it to the branch was tight, deliberate. Rachel photographed it with her iPhone, the flash startling bright in the dimness. Her phone claimed it was 15:52. The light filtering through the canopy suggested much later. She found 3 more prayer strips in the next 100 yards, each tied to a different tree, forming what might have been a line or might have been a perimeter. The buzzing in her head had evolved into something with rhythm now, almost like breathing. Tyler Dawson's campsite appeared at 16:15, or what remained of it. His tent stood properly erected, rainfly secured, no obvious damage. But the camp was wrong in ways Rachel's ranger training couldn't explain, and her sensitivity absolutely could. His gear was arranged too perfectly. Backpack propped against a log at a precise 90-degree angle. Camp stove positioned exactly in the center of a flat rock. Water bottles lined up by size, labels facing the same direction. This wasn't the organization of an experienced backpacker. This was the arrangement of someone or something that understood objects but not human behavior. Rachel's radio crackled. Patel, status? She jumped, her hand going reflexively to the benchmade at her hip. Found his camp, he's not here, gear is present, but... She trailed off, trying to find words that wouldn't sound insane. Something's off. Off how? Too organized, like someone staged it. A pause. Could he have been grabbed by someone? No signs of struggle, no displacement of the surrounding area. It's more like... Rachel walked the perimeter of the campsite, noting how even the dirt around the tent looked somehow arranged. Like everything was put back after being examined. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in the space between one breath and the next. Rachel's breath became visible, fog in October when it should have been merely cool. The moisture in the air began forming tiny crystals, not quite ice, catching what little light penetrated the canopy. She'd felt temperature drops before. Weather changed fast in the Olympics, but this was different. This felt directed, intentional. "Rachel?" Marnie's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You still there?" "Yeah, I'm..." The woman stood at the edge of the clearing. Rachel's hindbrain registered her before conscious thought caught up. Pale figure, white clothing, long black hair obscuring her face, standing perfectly still among the ferns. Every instinct Rachel had spent 3 years suppressing screamed simultaneously. The figure didn't move like a person. She was simply absent one moment, present the next, as if reality was a film with missing frames. Her white clothing, a kimono, Rachel's mind supplied uselessly, should have been bright against the green darkness of the forest. Instead, it seemed to absorb light, to create a hole in the visual field. The hair was wrong too. It hung too long, too black, moving independent of the breeze that didn't exist in this suddenly frozen pocket of forest. And beneath the hair, Rachel could almost see. She blinked. The woman was gone. "Rachel?" Marnie's voice was sharp now, cutting through the ringing in Rachel's ears. "You went quiet, what's happening?" Rachel's mouth tasted like copper. Her Garmin GPS was showing her coordinates as longitude and latitude that couldn't exist, numbers that placed her simultaneously in Washington and somewhere with a negative elevation reading. The device flickered, reset, showed her actual position, flickered again. She forced her voice steady. "I think I found why he was here. Someone else might be in this area. I'm going to continue the search. Rachel, if there's another person out there, I'll be careful." She ended the transmission before Marnie could argue, before she had to explain that person wasn't the right word for what she'd seen. Tyler's field notebook lay inside his tent, open to the last entry. Rachel pulled on nitrile gloves before touching it, some residual professionalism insisting on evidence preservation, even as every nerve in her body insisted on running. The handwriting started neat, deteriorated across the page. October 12th, 7:30 a.m. Found evidence of historical Japanese settlement approximately 2.3 miles north of Junction. Structures long collapsed, but foundation stones remain in circular pattern. Cultural artifacts present, ceramic fragments, metal tools. This is significant. No record of Japanese presence in this specific area during settlement period. Need to document everything. 8:45 a.m. Strange markings on several trees surrounding site. Shide strips, prayer markers. Some appear very old, others recent. Who has been maintaining them? 10:20 a.m. Temperature anomalies near the center of the site. Infrared thermometer reading 38 degrees in a 3-foot radius while ambient temp is 52 degrees. No logical explanation. Equipment malfunction? 11:15 a.m. Found what appears to be grave marker. Kanji inscription. I don't read Japanese but took photos. Will need translation. 12:30 p.m. Can't shake feeling of being watched. Probably just anxiety. This place has a weight to it. 2:00 p.m. Saw a woman in white dress among the trees. Called out, but she didn't respond. Will try to make contact. Could be another researcher or possibly homeless individual living in park. Should offer assistance. The entry ended mid-sentence in a scrawl that shot off the edge of the page, the pen leaving a long gouge in the paper, as if his hand had been jerked away violently. Rachel sat back on her heels, her mind working through implications she didn't want to accept. A historical Japanese settlement in the Olympic rainforest? Not impossible. Japanese immigrants had worked in the logging industry throughout the Pacific Northwest in the early 20th century. But this deep in the forest? In an area with no access roads, no river navigation, nothing but 40 miles of primeval rainforest in every direction? Her phone buzzed. Signal had returned somehow. just enough for a single text from Marnie. Contacted Japanese community in Port Angeles. They're sending someone who can translate. ETA 2 hours. Do not engage potential contact alone. Too late for that. Rachel's breath fogged in the air despite the October afternoon. The temperature was still dropping, now cold enough that moisture was condensing on every surface, turning the moss slick and dark. The buzzing in her skull had words in it now. She couldn't understand them, but she could feel their shape, their intention. They felt like grief that had calcified into something sharper. Tyler's GPS showed his last tracked position 0.4 miles north of his camp. Rachel marked the location on her own device, checked her radio battery, still full but the display flickering, and started walking. The prayer strips became more frequent. Every tree now, some with multiple strips, creating corridors of white fabric that channeled the path forward. Someone had spent years placing these, maintaining them, renewing them. The fabric ages varied, some so old they were barely threads, others recent enough to still be crisp. The foundation stones appeared gradually, stones that were too regular to be natural. They formed a circle perhaps 20 feet in diameter, half buried in decades of moss and detritus. At the center stood a marker, a wooden post carved with characters Rachel couldn't read, but that seemed to pull at something behind her eyes. Tyler Dawson knelt in front of the marker. Rachel's hand went to her radio, then stopped. Tyler's posture was wrong. He knelt too perfectly still, back too straight, hands resting on his thighs in a position that suggested ceremony rather than rest. His head was bowed, face invisible. Tyler? Rachel's voice sounded too loud in the heavy silence. Tyler Dawson? He didn't respond. Didn't move at all except for the slow rise and fall of his shoulders breathing. Rachel moved closer, every instinct screaming warnings her training insisted she ignore. This was the missing hiker. This was why she was here. She was supposed to make contact, assess his condition, evacuate if necessary. She was 10 feet away when she saw his hands. They were positioned in a mudra, ritual gesture, that she recognized from a comparative religion course years ago. Not Buddhist, not Hindu. Shinto. Specifically a gesture of supplication to the dead. Tyler, can you hear me? My name is Rachel Patel. I'm with the National Park Service. Your sister reported you missing. His shoulders stopped moving. The breathing stopped. For 5 heartbeats, Tyler Dawson was completely motionless. Then his head lifted. The movement was too smooth, too controlled, like a puppet on perfect strings. His face came into view, and Rachel's medical training cataloged everything wrong. Pupils dilated to full black, skin temperature clearly hypothermic given the visible cyanosis around his lips, muscle tension suggesting either seizure or tetanus. But it was his expression that made Rachel's hand finally close around her radio. His face held no recognition, no confusion at finding himself kneeling in a forgotten shrine deep in the Olympic rainforest. Instead, his features arranged themselves into something that approximated a smile, while containing no human warmth whatsoever. When he spoke, his voice had an accent that didn't match his file photo, syllables shaped around a language that wasn't English trying to use English sounds. She has been waiting, 73 years, waiting for someone who could hear. The temperature plummeted. Rachel's breath came out in clouds now, crystals forming immediately in the air. The moisture coating every surface began to freeze, turning the clearing into something ice-sculpted. Tyler, you're hypothermic. I need to get you warmed up, get you out of here. Rachel kept her voice level, professional, even as the buzzing in her skull crescendoed into almost words. Can you stand? His head tilted at an angle that suggested his neck contained more vertebrae than it should. This body is damaged, cold inside, but still useful, still able to show you. He stood in a single fluid motion, no preliminary shift of weight, no hand on ground for leverage, simply vertical in a way that violated physics. Rachel stepped back, her training and instincts finally aligned in urgent agreement. Stay where you are. I'm calling for medical evacuation. She doesn't want evacuation. Tyler's face remained in that not quite right smile. She wants witness. She wants understanding. She has tried so long to make someone understand. The woman in white stood behind him now, though Rachel hadn't seen her approach. Closer this time. Close enough to see that the hair covering her face moved like it was underwater, like it existed in a medium more viscous than air, close enough to see that the white kimono was actually burial clothing, the design specific to a particular era of Japanese funerary practice. Close enough to see the rope burns around her neck. Rachel's radio chose that moment to die completely, the display going black despite a full battery seconds ago. Her GPS followed, the screen fragmenting into impossible characters. The iPhone in her pocket grew so cold it burned through the fabric against her hip. Her name was Akiko. Tyler's voice had more of the accent now, the wrong accent. Japanese phonemes forcing themselves through American vocal cords. She came here with her husband in 1938. They thought the forest would hide them, thought distance from the coast would make them safe. The temperature made Rachel's joints ache. Ice crystals formed on her eyelashes. But the forest has rangers even then. Men who believed certain people didn't belong. Men who thought the war coming made certain people dangerous. Tyler took a step toward her. Akiko moved with him, her feet not quite touching the ground, the hem of her kimono trailing through moss without disturbing it. They hanged her from a cedar tree, made her husband watch. Then they killed him too, made it look like murder-suicide by a disturbed immigrant. Buried them both in unmarked graves and filed papers saying they'd relocated inland. Rachel's back hit a moss-covered cedar. She'd been retreating without realizing it, and now the forest had run out. Tyler, fight it. Whatever this is, you can... He's not fighting. The voice came from Tyler's mouth, but the accent was complete now, feminine, older. He invited me in. Such a sweet boy, so interested in forgotten history. So eager to help when he realized what happened. He said I could use his voice. Said someone should know. The woman in white was close enough now that Rachel could see through the hair, could see the face beneath. Beautiful once, before the violence. The eyes were black pits that reflected nothing, that seemed to pull light into them and offer nothing back. I don't want to be forgotten. The words came from both Tyler and from somewhere else, doubled, echoing. I don't want to be erased. My husband's name was Hiroshi. We had a daughter, Miyuki, 4 years old, sent to live with my sister in Seattle when the executive order came. I never saw her again. She thought we abandoned her. She died in 1994 thinking we chose to disappear. Rachel's teeth were chattering now, her core temperature dropping from prolonged exposure to the supernatural cold. But something in Akiko's words penetrated the fear. What do you want? To be remembered, to be acknowledged, to stop being a gap in history that everyone steps over without seeing. I see you. Rachel forced the words through numb lips. I acknowledge what happened to you. It was murder. It was injustice. Words. Akiko's voice held centuries of grief. Words are air. You will leave this forest and forget. Everyone forgets. They walk over my grave and feel nothing. You are different, yes. You can hear, but you will still forget. The woman in white moved closer. Tyler's body moved with her, puppet-like, his eyes still disturbingly wrong. Rachel could see now that his breathing had stopped entirely, that his skin had the waxy quality of serious hypothermia, that he needed medical attention immediately. I won't forget, Rachel said, meaning it knowing it wasn't enough. I'll make sure others know. I'll research what happened, find documentation, make sure. You will die here. Akiko's voice was almost gentle, almost sorry, and your ghost will join mine. And perhaps in another 70 years someone else will hear us, and we will try again. The possession was obvious now. Rachel could see the moment it began in earnest, Tyler's body convulsing once, twice, then going rigid. When his eyes opened again, they held that black pit quality, that light-absorbing absence. He moved toward her with that too fluid motion. Rachel's training said engage, de-escalate, talk down the threat. Her training had nothing for this. Her sensitivity, the thing she'd spent years suppressing, the ability she'd tried to rationalize away, that had everything. She could feel Akiko like pressure against her mind, like fingers testing the edges of her consciousness, looking for gaps, for ways in. The woman had been alone for 73 years, trapped by violence and injustice and the forest's indifference. Rachel's psychic sensitivity made her visible, made her a doorway. "I understand why you're angry," Rachel said, backing around the cedar, trying to maintain distance. "I understand what they did was unforgivable. But taking Tyler, taking me, that's not justice. That's becoming what they were." "I'm not angry." Akiko's voice came from Tyler's mouth and from the figure in white and from the trees themselves now, the entire clearing resonating with her words. "Anger burns out. I'm grief. Grief doesn't burn. Grief sediments. Grief becomes geography." The figure in white was close enough to touch. Rachel could smell her now, cedar and earth and something underneath that spoke of decades underground. The rope burns at her neck were vivid, detailed, an injury rendered permanent by the violence of her death. "Your daughter." Rachel played her last card, the only thing that might penetrate. Miyuki. She had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Your bloodline continues. They don't know you, but they exist because you existed. For the first time, something shifted in the black pit eyes. "You're lying." "I'm not. I can find them. I can tell them about you. Not as a ghost, not as a footnote, as a person. Akiko and Hiroshi, who came to America for a better life, who were murdered for the crime of existing while Japanese. Your story matters. Your descendants deserve to know you." The cold intensified to the point of pain. Rachel's fingers were losing sensation, her thoughts growing sluggish. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I've spent my entire life being told my perceptions are wrong, being told to ignore what I sense, to rationalize away what I know is true. I understand what it's like to be erased while still breathing." Rachel met those black pit eyes directly. "I won't erase you. I promise." The forest held its breath. Tyler's body shuddered. The black receded from his eyes in stages, pupils contracting, leaving behind confusion and terror and the very real effects of profound hypothermia. He collapsed forward, and Rachel barely caught him, his skin ice cold through his jacket. The woman in white stood 3 feet away, fully visible now, her hair parting enough to show her face clearly. She looked young, 30 at most when she died. The rope burns were brutal, but her expression had softened into something human. "Find my daughter's children," Akiko said, her voice no longer doubled, no longer echoing from the trees. "Tell them I loved Miyuki. Tell them I never wanted to leave her. I will. I swear. And tell them..." The figure was fading now, becoming translucent. "Tell them I forgive them for forgetting. How could they remember what they never knew?" The cold broke like a fever. Warm October air rushed back into the clearing, carrying the smell of living forest, of things growing rather than haunting. Tyler's breathing restarted with a gasp, his body convulsing against Rachel as circulation returned. Akiko was gone. The prayer strips remained, white fabric hanging from countless trees, marking a grave that would no longer be unmarked. Rachel keyed her radio with numb fingers. It crackled to life, battery somehow restored. "Patel to base. I have Tyler Dawson. He's alive but suffering from severe hypothermia. I need immediate evacuation from my current coordinates. And Marnie, contact the translator anyway. I'm going to need their help." The medevac took 40 minutes to arrive, the helicopter touching down in the nearest clearing a half-mile away. Rachel kept Tyler warm with her emergency bivouac and her own body heat, talking to him constantly as his confusion gave way to fragmentary memory. "There was a woman," he kept saying, his voice slurred from the cold. "She was so sad. I wanted to help. I thought if someone just listened." "You did help," Rachel told him. "You gave her a voice. That's not nothing." By the time the EMTs loaded Tyler into the helicopter, sunset was turning the forest gold and red. Rachel declined evacuation for herself, despite the medics' concerned looks at her own temperature readings. She had something she needed to do first. The translator arrived at the clearing an hour later. Dr. James Whitmore, retired professor of East Asian languages from University of Washington, now living in Port Angeles. He was 76, walked with a cane, and carried a handheld lantern like he was expecting the woods to fight back. Rachel led him to the marker at the center of the stone circle. "Can you read this?" Dr. Whitmore studied the characters in the lantern light, his expression shifting from curiosity to solemnity. "It's a grave marker. It says Akiko Tanaka, beloved wife and mother, 1908-1938. Hiroshi Tanaka, devoted husband and father, 1906-1938. May they rest in the peace they were denied in life." "Someone knew," Rachel said softly. "Someone knew what happened and left a marker." "There were rumors," Dr. Whitmore said quietly. "In the Japanese community. Stories about a couple who vanished from a logging camp in the late 30s. Most people assumed they'd fled inland to escape the coming internment. But some of the old-timers whispered about rangers who'd gotten too zealous about security." He looked at Rachel. "No one ever found proof. We have proof now." Rachel photographed the marker, the stone foundations, everything. "And we have names. Can you help me find their descendants? I can make some calls." It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of research, of phone calls, of following genealogical threads through decades. 3 weeks during which Rachel filed reports that carefully omitted anything that would get her psychiatric evaluation. Tyler Dawson returned to his family with a story about getting lost and hypothermic that was mostly true. He didn't mention the possession. Rachel didn't push him. Some truths were too heavy to force on people. But she kept her promise. Miyuki Tanaka had married Richard Chen in 1956 and had 3 children. She died never knowing what happened to her parents, carrying that abandonment wound her entire life. But her children had children. Her grandchildren had children. The family tree extended into the present, scattered across Seattle and Tacoma and Portland. Rachel contacted them through Dr. Whitmore, explained what she'd found as carefully as she could. A historical gravesite, evidence of a crime from 1938, their ancestors. The family gathered at the Hoh Rainforest on a Saturday in November. 15 people, spanning 4 generations, standing around a grave that was no longer unmarked. They'd brought flowers, offerings, photographs of Miyuki at various ages, showing her descendants what their great-great-grandmother had never seen. Dr. Whitmore led a small ceremony, speaking words in Japanese that Rachel didn't understand, but felt the shape of. The temperature remained normal, no supernatural cold, no figures in white. But Rachel felt something shift, a pressure releasing, like a held breath finally exhaled. The forest no longer felt like a scream mid-utterance. It felt like a forest. Afterward, Miyuki's granddaughter approached Rachel. "Thank you for finding them. My grandmother spent her whole life wondering. It broke something in her, not knowing. I wish she could have had this closure." "Maybe she knows now," Rachel said, meaning it in more ways than she could explain. The family left prayer strips of their own, bright white fabric against the ancient cedar. They promised to return, to maintain the site, to remember. Rachel stayed behind as the sun set, standing in the clearing that no longer felt haunted but merely sad. "I kept my promise," she said to the empty air. The forest gave no response beyond the ordinary sounds of evening, birds settling, wind in the canopy, the distant rush of the Hoh River. But Rachel's skull was quiet. The buzzing, the almost words, the sensation of wrongness. All of it had settled. For the first time in 3 years, the Hoh Rainforest felt like just a forest. She walked back to the trailhead as night fell, her headlamp cutting through the darkness. The prayer strips glowed white in the beam, markers of remembrance rather than warning. Rachel Patel would continue as a ranger for 7 more years. She would help find other lost hikers, respond to other emergencies, maintain other trails. But she never again suppressed her sensitivity, never again pretended she couldn't feel the places where tragedy had soaked into the land. She'd learned that some things demanded to be felt, that witnessing was its own kind of service, that being forgotten was a second death, and sometimes preventing it required listening to frequencies other people couldn't hear. The Olympics held other stories, other grief that had calcified into geography. Rachel became the ranger who documented them, the one who listened when the forest spoke, the one who made sure the forgotten were remembered. She never saw Akiko again, but sometimes walking the deep trails where the canopy turned the world green and hushed, Rachel would find fresh prayer strips on trees she'd passed the day before, white fabric tied with precise knots, placed by hands she never saw. Acknowledgement, gratitude, peace. The forest no longer screamed. It whispered instead, and Rachel Patel finally had the courage to listen. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Laura Vega found the photographs scattered across the trail at mile marker 4.3, still wet despite 3 days without rain. Each Polaroid showed the same woman in a white dress standing at Salduke Falls, but the date stamps spanned 47 years, 1964, 1979, 1993, 2008, 2011. The woman never aged. In the final photograph taken 2 days ago according to the timestamp, the woman was looking directly at the camera, and Laura recognized her own ranger station in the blurred background. Her hands trembled as she gathered the Polaroids. The medication Dr. Reese had prescribed 3 months ago was supposed to stop this. The cold sweats, the sense of wrongness that crawled through her gut whenever she approached certain areas of Olympic National Park. Generalized anxiety disorder, he'd said, scribbling the prescription while barely looking at her. Common in high-stress professions. The isolation doesn't help. But this wasn't anxiety. Laura had learned to recognize the difference over 8 years of ranging these forests. Anxiety was the tightness in her chest during budget reviews, the sleepless nights before performance evaluations. This was something else, a visceral knowing that preceded understanding. Like her body recognized threats her mind refused to process. She pressed the radio mic on her Motorola XPR 7552. Vega to dispatch, over. Static answered. She adjusted the frequency, tried again. The radio had worked perfectly an hour ago at the trailhead. The Hoh rainforest pressed close around her, Sitka spruce and western hemlock towering 200 feet overhead, their trunks wrapped in moss so thick it looked like green fur. The rainfall here averaged 12 feet annually, creating a cathedral of dripping vegetation that muffled sound and swallowed light. Even at noon, the canopy filtered sunlight into an aquatic dimness. Laura studied the most recent Polaroid again. The woman's face was partially obscured by long black hair, but her eyes were visible, dark and fixed directly on whoever held the camera. In the background, barely visible through the trees, was the distinctive red roof of Laura's own ranger station, 2 miles from here. Impossible. The photograph was dated October 15, 2011. 2 days ago. Jordan Hayes had been reported missing that same day. Laura had taken the call herself, speaking with Jordan's husband while she typed the details into the incident report. 26 years old, experienced day hiker, solo trek on the Salduke Falls Trail, expected back by sunset. When he'd called at 11 p.m., his voice had carried the specific pitch of fear that Laura had learned to recognize. Not worried yet, but approaching the threshold. They'd launched the search at first light. Laura, 2 other rangers, and a K9 unit from Port Angeles. The dog had tracked Jordan's scent to mile marker 4.3 and stopped, circling the same 10-foot radius repeatedly, whining in a way that made its handler nervous. Never seen her do this, the handler had said, pulling the German Shepherd back. She's trained to track, not to refuse. Something here she doesn't like. They'd found Jordan's backpack 30 feet off trail, partially concealed under a fallen cedar. Her Garmin eTrex GPS was inside, still powered on, showing her last recorded position at exactly this spot. Her water bottles were full. Her iPhone 4 was at 63% battery, but no Jordan. Laura had felt it then, that sensation like ice water in her veins that the medication was supposed to eliminate. The forest had seemed to hold its breath around her, waiting. Now she was back, alone, against protocol, but unable to ignore the pull. She'd told dispatch she was doing a follow-up sweep. She hadn't mentioned the dreams. 3 nights in a row she'd woken at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of water running. Not her kitchen sink or bathroom, water rushing over rocks, the distinctive roar of a waterfall. She'd lie in bed in her dark cabin listening to Stormy Falls echo through her bedroom, despite being 2 miles away through dense forest. And last night she'd heard singing, a woman's voice high and clear, singing in a language Laura didn't recognize. Japanese, maybe, though she couldn't be certain. The melody was beautiful and deeply wrong, like a lullaby sung by something that had forgotten what comfort meant. She'd gotten up, checked every window, found nothing. But when she'd returned to bed, there was a single long black hair on her pillow that hadn't been there before. Laura shoved the Polaroids into her jacket pocket and continued up the trail. The path to Stormy Falls climbed gradually through old-growth forest, crossing several wooden bridges over streams swollen with October rain. The usual sounds were absent, no bird calls, no rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Just the omnipresent drip of water from moss-laden branches and her own boots on wet earth. Her Garmin showed 4.7 miles to the falls, another hour at her current pace. The temperature dropped as she walked, enough that her breath began to fog. Laura checked her watch. The digital display read 58 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt at least 20 degrees colder. She zipped her Arc'teryx jacket to her chin, but the cold seemed to bypass the fabric entirely, settling into her bones. At mile marker 5:1, she found the second cluster of photographs. These were older, actual developed prints, not Polaroids, their edges yellowed with age. The woman in white appeared in each one, always standing near water. Stormy Falls in some, the Ho River in others, occasionally just a stream or pool. The background shifted, but the woman remained constant. Pale skin, long black hair, white dress that might have been a kimono or might have been a nightgown. Laura turned over one of the older photographs. On the back, in faded ink, Keiko, 1964. Keiko. The name triggered something, a fragment of memory from Ranger orientation 8 years ago. The older Rangers drinking coffee in the break room, swapping stories. Someone had mentioned a woman who'd drowned. Japanese, newly arrived in the States. The details were hazy, dismissed as local legend, the kind of story every park accumulated over decades. Laura pulled out her iPhone, hoping for signal despite knowing better. No service, as expected. The cellular coverage in Olympic's interior was non-existent until you reached the main visitor areas. She photographed the prints with her phone anyway, documenting their position before gathering them. 17 photographs total, spanning decades. In the most recent ones, the quality improved. Color instead of black and white, sharper focus. But the woman never changed. And in every photograph from the last 10 years, Jordan Hayes appeared in the background. Laura's stomach dropped as she recognized the details she'd initially missed. That photograph from 2008, a figure in blue hiking gear, barely visible among the trees. Jordan Hayes wore blue on the day she disappeared. The picture from 2003 showed someone in the distance with a distinctive yellow backpack identical to the one they'd found. Impossible. Jordan would have been 17 in 2003. A teenager in Ohio, according to her husband, not hiking Olympic National Park. Unless these weren't photographs of the past. Laura's vision tunneled, her peripheral vision darkening as her pulse hammered in her ears. She recognized this response. Her therapist called it dissociation, a trauma response from the accident 5 years ago when she'd pulled her partner's body from the overturned vehicle. But this felt different. This felt like her consciousness was trying to escape her body, to flee from an understanding her rational mind refused to accept. She forced herself to breathe. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. The grounding technique Dr. Reese had taught her. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in an instant. Laura's breath came out in thick clouds now, crystallizing in air that had been merely cool seconds before. Frost began forming on the moss around her, spreading in intricate patterns like ice on a window. The silence deepened, becoming oppressive, as if the forest itself had stopped breathing. She heard water running, Not the distant ambient sound of streams and rainfall, but close, immediate. Water rushing over rocks just ahead on the trail, despite the creek being a quarter-mile away according to her map. Laura's hand moved to her Benchmade knife, a ridiculous gesture against she didn't know what. The blade was meant for cutting cord, clearing brush, emergency first aid, not for whatever was causing frost to form in 50-degree weather. The sound grew louder. She could hear individual splashes now, water hitting stones with the rhythm of Solduk Falls despite being 2 miles away from the cascade. She should turn back. Every instinct screamed retreat. This was exactly the kind of situation that got rangers killed, pushing forward alone, ignoring protocol, chasing a feeling rather than following procedure. But Jordan Hayes was out here somewhere, and Laura was the only one who could feel it. This certainty that Jordan wasn't lost, wasn't injured, wasn't sheltering somewhere waiting for rescue. Jordan was being kept. Laura walked forward. The trail curved through a particularly dense section of forest where the moss hung in curtains from branches, and the ground was spongy with decomposition. The sound of rushing water intensified until it seemed to be coming from every direction at once. Then she saw the hair, long strands of black hair, caught on branches at shoulder height, stretching back along the trail like a breadcrumb path. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, as if someone with impossibly long hair had walked this route repeatedly, leaving pieces of themselves behind. Laura touched one strand. It was wet and cold, and when she pulled it free from the branch, it dissolved in her fingers like spider silk, leaving only a faint smell of decay. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, impossible, no signal, and when she pulled it out, the screen showed a notification despite the no service indicator, a text message from an unknown number. She's waiting at the falls. She's been waiting so long. Laura's hands shook as she deleted the message, but another appeared immediately. You can see her. You always could. That's why you came back. Another. The others couldn't help Jordan. They can't see. But you can. Laura shoved the phone back in her pocket, but it kept buzzing. Message after message, her phone vibrating against her hip like a frantic heartbeat. She pulled it out again. The screen was filled with photographs now, hundreds of them loading in rapid succession, all showing the same woman in white getting closer in each image, first distant, then meters away, then close enough to see the details of her face. Pale skin, dark eyes, mouth open in an expression that might have been grief or might have been rage. The final photograph showed Laura herself, standing on this trail, taken from behind. The timestamp read, "Now." Laura spun around. The trail behind her was empty, but the temperature had dropped so low that ice crystals were forming in the air, glittering in the dim light. The sound of water had stopped completely, replaced by silence so total that Laura could hear her own heartbeat, her blood moving through her veins, the tiny clicking of her joints as she moved. Then, soft and clear in the silence, singing. The same melody from her bedroom the previous night, closer now, the Japanese words flowing in a pattern that Laura's mind couldn't quite grasp, but her body recognized as deeply, fundamentally wrong. The song made her teeth ache, made pressure build behind her eyes, made her want to claw at her own ears. She ran. Protocol abandoned, professionalism forgotten. Laura ran up the trail, boots slipping on wet earth, branches whipping her face. The singing followed, staying exactly the same volume no matter how fast she moved, as if the source was moving with her, maintaining perfect distance. The trail opened suddenly into a clearing and Laura nearly collided with the old bridge across the Solduk River. The wooden structure was 50 years old at least, planks weathered to silver, rope handrails frayed with age. A sign marked it as unsafe, scheduled for replacement. Laura stumbled onto it anyway, desperate to cross the water. Some fragment of folklore echoed in her mind. Spirits couldn't cross running water. It was probably European legend, not Japanese, but she clung to the hope anyway. The bridge creaked under her weight. Halfway across, she made the mistake of looking down. Jordan Hayes stood in the river directly below, water rushing around her waist, her blue hiking gear soaked and darkened. Her head was tilted back at an impossible angle, neck clearly broken, eyes open and staring directly up at Laura. Laura's scream caught in her throat as Jordan's mouth opened and the singing poured out. That same melody, the same Japanese words, but emerging from Jordan's dead lips in a voice that wasn't hers. The bridge planks splintered under Laura's feet. She fell, managed to grab a rope handrail, found herself dangling above the river with Jordan directly below, reaching up with hands that were too pale, fingers too long, still singing in that voice that hurt to hear. Laura's grip slipped. She caught the rope with her other hand, but the fibers were old and rotting, unraveling under her weight. Below Jordan's broken-necked corpse smiled, water rushing around her, arms outstretched to catch. No, not Jordan's corpse. Jordan's body, but something else looking out through her eyes. Something that had worn that white dress in the photographs, that had been waiting at these falls for 47 years, that needed a new vessel and had chosen Jordan Hayes to fill. A Uri. Laura recognized it suddenly, dredging up half-remembered details from a college anthropology course. Japanese vengeful spirits, souls of those who died in extreme emotional distress, rage, sorrow, injustice. They haunted specific locations, driven by unfinished business targeting those who reminded them of their betrayal. The spirit wearing Jordan's body began to climb from the water, movements too fluid, too graceful, water streaming from her clothes but her long black hair, not Jordan's short brown bob, hanging in front of her face. Laura's rope snapped. She plunged into the river, the shock of cold water driving the air from her lungs. The current grabbed her immediately, pulling her under, tumbling her against rocks. Her head broke the surface long enough for one gasping breath before she went under again, swallowing water, her heavy boots and jacket dragging her down. Something grabbed her ankle. Cold fingers, impossibly strong, pulled her deeper. Laura kicked frantically, but the grip was unyielding. She opened her eyes underwater. A terrible mistake, and saw the woman in white beneath her, black hair floating like ink in the current, pale face tilted up, eyes meeting Laura's with recognition and terrible hunger. The spirit's mouth opened, and instead of water rushing in, words emerged clear despite being underwater. "You see me? Finally, someone sees me." Laura's lungs were burning, vision darkening at the edges. She was going to die here, drowned like Keiko had drowned, pulled under by the same spirit that had taken Jordan Hayes. Her thrashing hand struck something solid, a rock embedded in the riverbed. She grabbed it, swung it down hard toward the fingers on her ankle. The stone passed through the spirit's hand like it was made of smoke, but the grip loosened for just an instant. Laura kicked free, pushed off the river bottom with all her remaining strength, broke the surface gasping. The current helped now, carrying her downstream and away from the spirit, washing her toward the riverbank. She grabbed an exposed root, pulled herself half out of the water, coughing up river water and bile. The woman in white stood on the opposite bank, watching. Not Jordan's body anymore. The spirit had abandoned that vessel. Just the pale woman from the photographs, hair hanging to her waist, white dress soaked and clinging, looking exactly as she must have looked in 1964 when something terrible happened to her. "Who are you?" Laura choked out. "What do you want?" The spirit tilted her head, a gesture that was almost curious. When she spoke, her voice was soft, sad, the melody of her earlier song woven through the words. "I am Keiko Nakamura. I was 22 years old. He said he loved me. He brought me here to see the falls. He held me under until I stopped fighting." Laura's entire body was shaking, from cold and from fear, and from the terrible sadness in the spirit's voice. "Who? Who killed you? His name doesn't matter. He's dead now. But I remain, always remain, waiting at the falls where he drowned me, where he left my body wedged under rocks, where they found me 3 weeks later and said it was an accident." Keiko stepped closer to the water's edge, and ice began forming where her feet touched the ground. "For 47 years I've waited. For 47 years I've tried to be seen. Most people walk right past. They feel the cold. They sense something wrong, but they don't see me." "I see you," Laura whispered. "Yes. Keiko smiled, and it was the saddest expression Laura had ever witnessed. You see ghosts. You always have. You feel the dead spaces in the world. That's why you came to this place, all these forests, all these places where people disappear and are never found. You can sense where they linger. Laura wanted to deny it, but the truth resonated in her chest. How many times had she felt drawn to certain areas of the park? How many times had she reported unusual feelings about search zones, only to have other rangers dismiss her instincts? The accident 5 years ago hadn't created this sensitivity. It had forced her to acknowledge what she'd been ignoring her entire life. "Where's Jordan?" Laura asked. "Where's her body?" Keiko turned, gestured up the trail. "At the falls, where I showed her the truth, where she understood finally what happened to me." The spirit's expression shifted, grief transforming into something harder. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I never mean to hurt them. But when someone finally sees me, when someone finally acknowledges I exist, I can't help but show them everything. All 47 years of rage and sorrow and loneliness. It fills them up. It drowns them from the inside." "The photographs," Laura said, understanding now. "You took them. You've been documenting yourself, leaving proof that you existed, that you still exist." "Yes. Though the images never last. They fade. They disappear. They're dismissed as hoaxes or tricks of light." Keiko's form flickered, becoming momentarily transparent. "You have the photographs now. You've seen me. Will you tell them? Will you make them believe?" Laura's teeth chattered too hard to answer immediately. She pulled herself fully onto the bank, water streaming from her clothes. "Tell them what? That a vengeful spirit has been haunting Sol Duke Falls for half a century? They'll put me on permanent medical leave. I'm already on psychiatric medication because I told my doctor I feel presences in the forest." "Then you understand," Keiko said softly. "We are both invisible, both dismissed, both haunting places no one wants to acknowledge." She began to fade, her form losing substance. "Jordan Hayes is at the falls. Her body, at least. What I showed her, what she became after seeing me, you'll find that there too. I'm sorry. I didn't want another death. But the loneliness is so vast, and when someone finally sees me, I can't control what pours out." "Wait." Laura struggled to her feet, but Keiko was already gone, dissipating into mist that the river current carried away. The forest was silent again. The unnatural cold was lifting, temperature rising back to the ambient chill of October in Washington. Laura's radio crackled suddenly, making her jump. "Vega, this is dispatch. Do you copy? Over." Her hand shook as she raised the radio. "This is Vega. I copy. Over." "Where the hell have you been? We've been trying to reach you for 40 minutes. We found something. You need to get to Sol Duke Falls immediately. Over." Laura looked up the trail, toward where the sound of the waterfall echoed through the forest. Real sound now, not supernatural, just water falling over basalt the way it had for thousands of years. "Copy that," she said. "I'm already en route." "What did you find?" "Over." A pause, then, "Better if you see it yourself. Just prepare yourself. It's bad." "Over." Laura started walking. Her clothes were soaked, her body hypothermic, but she moved up the trail with mechanical determination. The photographs were still in her pocket, waterlogged but intact. Proof of something, though she didn't know what anyone would believe. The trail climbed steadily for another mile before opening onto the viewing platform at Sol Duke Falls. The cascade dropped 90 feet over a series of basalt ledges, water thundering into the pool below with enough force to create a constant mist. Two other rangers stood on the platform, Mitchell and Rodriguez from the Port Angeles station. Mitchell's face was gray. Rodriguez was on his radio, calling for the medical examiner. Laura joined them at the railing and looked down. Jordan Hayes was in the pool beneath the falls, wedged between two rocks in exactly the position Keiko Nakamura's body must have been found 47 years ago. Her neck was broken, bent at the same impossible angle Laura had seen in the river. But that wasn't what made Mitchell look sick. Jordan's eyes were open, staring upward, and her mouth was open too, frozen in the act of singing, though no sound emerged. Her hands were positioned as if she'd been trying to pull long hair away from her face, hair she didn't have, hair that had belonged to someone else. "We found her 20 minutes ago," Mitchell said quietly. "The weird thing is..." He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind. You'll think I'm crazy." "Try me," Laura said. "We found her 20 minutes ago," Mitchell repeated slowly. "But the temperature reading from the water says she's been dead for at least 3 days, since the night she went missing. But that's impossible because..." He pulled out his phone, showed Laura a photograph. "I took this picture yesterday during the search, routine documentation of the search area." Laura looked at the image. The pool beneath Solduke Falls, empty except for water and rocks. "I was standing right here," Mitchell said, "right where we're standing now, and I'm telling you, there was nothing in that pool yesterday. Nothing." Rodriguez finished his radio call and joined them. "Me says 2 hours minimum before they can get someone out here. We're supposed to secure the scene and wait." He looked at Laura's soaked clothes, her blue lips. "What the hell happened to you?" "Fell in the river," Laura said. It wasn't entirely a lie. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She would never be fine again, because as she stared down at Jordan Hayes' body, she saw something the other rangers couldn't see. A figure in white standing in the shallows near the corpse, black hair dripping water, pale hands reaching toward Jordan with a gesture that might have been comfort or might have been claiming. Keiko Nakamura still waiting, still watching, still desperately visible to the one person who could see her. Laura's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, already knowing what she'd find. A new photograph, taken from behind her, showing her standing on this platform. And in the reflection of the water below, alongside her own distorted image, another figure. White dress, dark hair, face tilted up toward the camera. The timestamp read, "Now." Laura deleted the photo, but another appeared immediately. Then another. Her phone filled with images, dozens, hundreds, all showing Keiko in different poses, different angles, always near water, always waiting, always alone. The final message simply read, "You'll come back. They always come back. The ones who can see me, they always come back." Laura turned off her phone, but she could still feel it buzzing in her pocket, could still sense the messages arriving, the photographs accumulating, the documentation of a death that happened 47 years ago but was still happening, would always be happening at Solduke Falls. "Laura?" Rodriguez was staring at her. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She laughed, a sound that came out too high, too broken. "I'm fine. Just cold. The water was cold." But she wasn't fine, and she wasn't just cold. The temperature was normal now, but Laura could still feel the chill in her bones, the same deep cold she'd felt when Keiko grabbed her ankle underwater. The same cold that would follow her home to her cabin, that would wake her at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of singing, that would leave long black hairs on her pillow. Because Keiko was right. Laura would come back. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't help it. She was a sensitive, a person who could see what others couldn't, and that gift was a curse that made her visible to the dead. The medical examiner arrived 3 hours later. By then the sun was setting, and shadows were lengthening across the pool beneath the falls. Laura watched as they carefully extracted Jordan Hayes' body, documented the scene, made their official pronouncements about cause of death. "Drowning," they said. "Accidental. She must have slipped on the rocks, fallen into the pool, struck her head. The broken neck was consistent with impact trauma. A tragic accident, nothing more." Laura didn't mention the photographs, didn't mention the spirit in white, didn't mention that Jordan's body had appeared in the pool sometime between yesterday and today, despite being dead for 3 days. She handed over the Polaroids and the old photographs she'd found on the trail, but described them as possible evidence without explanation. The senior ranger flipped through them, frowned, handed them to the medical examiner. "Probably been out here for years," he said. "You know how hikers are, leave all kinds of trash and weird shit in the woods, probably some art project or something." We'll log them as evidence, but I doubt they're related. By the time they packed up Jordan's body and headed back down the trail, it was fully dark. Laura volunteered to stay and secure the scene until morning, said she'd camp at the ranger shelter near the falls. The others were too tired to argue. She waited until their headlamps disappeared down the trail, until the sound of their voices faded completely. Then she walked back to the viewing platform and looked down at the pool. Keiko was there, standing in the water where Jordan's body had been. The spirit was more solid now, more present, as if Laura's acknowledgement had given her substance. "Why didn't you tell them?" Keiko asked. "They wouldn't believe me," Laura said. "Just like no one believed you when you were alive. Just like no one has believed you for 47 years. What will you do?" Laura pulled out her phone, opened the camera. "Document you. Tell your story. Make them see you, even if they don't believe." She began taking photographs, dozens of them, capturing Keiko in the water, near the falls, standing on the rocks. The spirit watched with an expression of cautious hope. "They'll say you're crazy," Keiko warned. "They already do," Laura said. She sat down on the platform, pulled out the waterlogged Polaroids from her pocket. "Tell me what happened. Tell me everything. I'll write it down. I'll make sure someone knows." And so Keiko spoke. She told Laura about coming to America in 1964, about meeting the man who said he loved her, about the afternoon at Solduke Falls that became her death. She described the water forcing its way into her lungs, the panic, the final terrible understanding that he wasn't going to stop, wasn't going to let her up. Laura listened and took notes on her phone, and when the battery died, she used a pen in the back of an incident report form. She documented everything, the dates, the details, the injustice of a death ruled accidental when it was murder. "What happens now?" Keiko asked as dawn began to lighten the sky. "I don't know," Laura admitted. "But you're not invisible anymore, not to me." The spirit smiled, genuinely smiled, not the sad expression from before. "Thank you for seeing me, for listening. Will you still—" Laura hesitated. "Will you still follow me? Leave me those messages?" "Yes," Keiko said simply. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to stop. The loneliness is too vast, and you're the first person in 47 years who's truly seen me. I can't let that go." Laura nodded slowly. She'd expected as much. "What about Jordan? Why her?" "She saw me too," Keiko said. For just a moment, standing near the falls, she looked right at me and saw me. Her eyes widened. She knew. And I was so grateful, so desperate to be acknowledged, that I showed her everything, all my death, all my rage. It was too much. It filled her up and drowned her from the inside, just like water filled my lungs. "So I'm next," Laura said flatly. "No." Keiko's voice was firm. "You're different. You've been seeing spirits your whole life. You have space for me inside you, room for my story alongside your own." Jordan was unprepared. The weight of 47 years of death crushed her in an instant. "But you—" The spirit studied Laura carefully. "You're already haunted. What's one more ghost?" Laura laughed bitterly. "That's not as comforting as you might think." "I know." Keiko began to fade as sunlight touched the pool. "But it's the truth. You'll carry me now, my story, my presence, and in return I'll help you. There are others like me in these forests, spirits, presences, the remnants of deaths no one remembers. I'll show you where they are. You can help them, the way you're helping me." "I don't want to help them," Laura said. "I want to be normal. I want to take my medication and feel nothing and live a normal life." "But you won't," Keiko said, and she sounded sad again. "Because you can't ignore what you see. It's who you are. The medication won't work. The therapy won't work. This is your gift and your curse." She disappeared completely as the sun rose fully, leaving Laura alone on the platform with pages of notes and a phone full of photographs that would probably disappear like all the others. Laura hiked back to her station as the forest woke around her. Birds were singing again. Normal sounds, nothing supernatural. The temperature was rising to a normal October morning. Everything appeared completely ordinary. But Laura could feel Keiko's presence like a weight in her chest, a cold spot that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. The spirit was there now, woven into Laura's awareness, a constant presence that would never fully leave. Her cabin looked exactly as she'd left it. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. Long black hairs covered her pillow. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arranged in careful patterns that might have been Japanese characters or might have been abstract art. Laura's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, found a new message from an unknown number. "Thank you for listening. I'm sorry for the burden, but I'm not alone anymore, and neither are you." Laura deleted the message. Another appeared immediately. "There are 17 others in Olympic National Park. 17 deaths that were ruled accidents but weren't. I can show you where they are. We can help them together." 17. Laura's legs went weak, and she sat down heavily on her bed, black hair crunching under her. 17 more spirits like Keiko, waiting to be seen, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to pour their 40 or 50 or 60 years of death into anyone who could perceive them. She could quit, could turn in her ranger badge, move to a city, find a desk job somewhere far from forests and waterfalls and places where people disappeared. The medication might work there, in concrete and steel, away from the thin places where the dead lingered. But Keiko was right. Laura couldn't ignore what she saw. It was who she was. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an actual call from dispatch. "Vega, you there? We've got another missing hiker, 28-year-old male, last seen on the Ho River Trail yesterday evening. Can you take lead on this one? You've got good instincts for this kind of search." Good instincts. Laura almost laughed. "Yeah," she said into the phone. "I'll take it. Give me 30 minutes to gear up." She hung up, stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked exhausted, eyes shadowed, lips still faintly blue from cold, but she also looked different somehow, more present, more solid, as if acknowledging Keiko had made Laura herself more real. The black hairs on her pillow were already starting to fade, dissolving like spider silk the way they had on the trail. By tonight they'd be gone completely, and by tomorrow people would think she'd imagined them. But Laura would remember, and Keiko would still be there, in the cold spot in her chest, in the singing at 3:47 a.m., in the photographs that would appear on her phone showing a woman in white standing just behind her reflection. Laura changed into dry clothes, checked her equipment, Garmin GPS, Motorola radio, Benchmade knife. Everything normal, everything professional, everything exactly as it should be. Except nothing would ever be normal again. As she headed out to search for the missing hiker, the 18th victim in Olympic National Park who might not be missing at all but might be standing at the Ho River, waiting to be seen, Laura felt Keiko's presence strengthen. The spirit was right. They would help the others together. Because Laura couldn't stop seeing them, couldn't stop being the one person in 1,000 who perceived the dead spaces in the world, and because somewhere in Olympic National Park, 17 more spirits were waiting. Waiting to be seen. Waiting to be acknowledged. Waiting to finally, after decades of invisibility, tell someone what really happened to them. Laura drove toward the Ho River Trail as the sun climbed higher, and in her rearview mirror she could have sworn she saw a woman in white sitting in her back seat, black hair dripping water onto the upholstery, pale hands folded peacefully in her lap. When Laura looked back again, the seat was empty, but the wet spots on the upholstery remained. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.